Coco is a young girl in a world that has magic and witches, but unlike in the 1800s, witches are actually celebrated here because of the miracles they can perform, which is why Coco wants to become a witch someday. Coco is hanging laundry out to dry one day when she happens to spot a flying Pegasus carriage landing near the house. This is the first time she has ever seen one land so close by, so she runs downstairs to ask her mom if she can go have a look at it. However, as she opens the main door, she accidentally bumps into a man standing there. She apologizes, but he says it's fine since it was kind of his own fault for standing in front of a doorway to begin with. Coco then looks up and notices that there is a group of ladies looking through the store's fabric collection, and she assumes they must be the ones who arrived in the carriage a moment ago. She then looks at the man, but he can already tell what she's going to ask, so he clarifies that he's not part of their group. The ladies are amazed by the selection of fabrics available here because it's even better than what they usually get at the castle town, so they intend to buy a lot at once, which leaves Coco's mother really busy. She asks Coco to help out a little, and Coco is more than happy to do so. But first, she goes up to her mom and asks if she can go see the Pegasus carriage outside after she's done. Her mom doesn't like the idea of Coco messing with the Pegasus that belonged to her customers, but since Coco is asking so nicely, she agrees to let her go, but only after she's done helping. Coco is excited to hear that and runs over to the man to take his order. She apologizes for the delay and asks him what he needs, so he tells her he wants a smoky white cloth, and he has already written down the exact measurements he needs, so all Coco needs to do now is cut it out for him. Coco goes to find the color of material the man is looking for, and after getting it, she marks out the measurements with some chalk and begins cutting. However, once she's done, she notices the man staring intently at her work, which catches her off guard, but he's just fascinated by how precise Coco's movements were, and he says that craftsmanship as good as this feels like magic to him. However, even though it was meant to be a compliment, Coco refuses to accept it because magic is something so much more special than anything she could do with her ordinary hands, so she doesn't think it's fair to compare magic to something as mediocre as her work. The man can tell that Coco really likes magic, so he asks her if there's a specific reason she is so fascinated by it, and Coco explains that when she was little, she went to a festival at the castle, and while she was there, she ended up meeting a witch who was wearing a mask. The witch called her over and asked if she wanted to buy a magic picture book from him, but while Coco did love a good picture book, she had no idea what magic was at the time. The witch then conjured up a few shadow figures to demonstrate the wonders of magic, and he even powered up the cobblestone beneath Coco's feet for an extra touch of wonder. And seeing all this convinced Coco that magic was the best thing in the world. She eagerly bought the book and ran back to her mom to tell her all about it, and Coco's mom is convinced that Coco just fell for a scam of some kind. But as long as she's happy, that's all that matters. Coco then tells her mom that she wants to become a witch in the future, but her mom gives her a reality check and tells her there's no way she can become one. Coco is disappointed to hear that and asks why, so her mom explains to her that only those who are born with magical power can become witches, so ordinary people like them don't have what it takes to become witches. Since that day, Coco's dream of becoming a witch was crushed, but she is still quite fond of watching magic being used, even if she knows she will never be able to do it herself. The man is intrigued, so he asks Coco if she can tell him a little more about the witch she met. But just then, they all hear a loud crash coming from the direction of the Pegasus carriage, so Coco is worried that something bad might have happened to it. She rushes out to see for herself, and sure enough, the Pegasus carriage has been flipped over somehow, and the ones responsible are these two. They are Coco's friends, and they had seen the carriage outside, so they went to take a look, but while they were doing so, one of the boys bumped his head against the underside of the carriage, accidentally destroying the magic disc that allowed it to fly in the first place. Coco's mother grabs the boys and forces them to apologize to the ladies for what happened, but the ladies are still upset because they can't get home without the carriage, and it was a gift from their father. Coco's mom doesn't know what to do since there's no way she can afford to pay for a replacement, but just then, after inspecting the carriage, the man tells everyone he thinks he can fix it. The ladies are skeptical at first because this carriage was handcrafted with flying magic from a witch, so there's no way some random guy would be able to fix it. But that's when the man reveals that his name is Kaifri, and he is indeed a witch. The ladies are all overjoyed when they find out that Kaifri is a witch, especially Coco, and they all thank him for his help, but Kaifri does mention that there's a bit of a problem. He says he isn't comfortable performing the magic out in the open, so he asks if there's somewhere private he could go instead, and Coco immediately speaks up to invite him to use the house's workshop. After all, this might be her only chance to witness a witch casting a spell firsthand, but that plan doesn't exactly work out for her since, as soon as Kaifri gets to the workshop, He tells Coco to stand, watch outside, and not let anyone enter under any circumstances. That really puts a damper on her plan to learn magic from Quaifree since he clearly doesn't want anyone watching him. But rules like that only work on people who are willing to listen, and Coco's friends might as well be deaf in that regard because they immediately try to sneak around the house and onto the roof so they can spy on Quaifree's spellcasting. Coco follows them and tries to get them to come down, but then she realizes that she still really wants to see the magic as well, so she climbs onto the roof and asks the boys to move over. They then open the window, expecting to get a first-class view of the magical process, but to their disappointment, Quaifree is really thorough, so he closes all the curtains before he begins. And there's no way they can open them without him noticing, so they all give up and head back down. Coco is about to leave as well, but just then she remembers that she left the roof hatch open earlier when she was hanging the laundry out to dry, so she climbs up onto the roof and enters the house through the hatch. She then peers into the workshop through a crack in the wall boards, and she can now clearly see what Quaifree is up to. All this time, she had thought spells were cast with words or actions, but from what she can see, Quaifree is actually only drawing on the disc. That must mean that the stick she got with the magic book all those years ago wasn't meant to be a wand, but rather a pen. And if learning to draw the spells is really all it takes to use magic, then maybe there's still hope for her to become a witch. Quaifree eventually finishes drawing the spell, and seeing this, Coco panics because if he heads outside and doesn't see her by the door, then he will know she was spying on him. Sure enough, Quaifree heads out to go talk to Coco, but by the time he gets there, Coco has already made it back, although she's extremely dirty and out of breath from all the running she had to do. After that, Quaifree puts the magic disc back in the carriage, so the noble ladies are able to take off and return home without any issues. And later on, Quaifree leaves as well, so Coco and her mom wave as he walks away. Coco's mom is honestly relieved because, considering how much Coco loves magic, she was fully convinced that Coco would say she wanted to leave with Quaifree, and she wouldn't know what to do with herself if Coco left her behind. Coco hugs her mom and tells her she doesn't need to worry because she would never leave her, and her mom is really happy to hear that, so she suggests they should head back inside and get dinner started. Coco and her mom have a nice and cozy meal together, and after washing up, Coco heads off to go to bed, but she doesn't actually plan to get any sleep tonight. She sets her candle by her bedside and takes out the wand that came with her magic book. Now that she knows it's supposed to be a pen, she realizes that there's a cap on one end of it, and the other end with the orb is a container for the pen's ink. Additionally, all the pictures and diagrams in the book must be the drawings that are needed to cast spells, so Coco decides to practice copying some of them down on a sheet of paper. She spends several minutes analyzing the different parts of the first spell, and then she begins carefully tracing it onto a separate piece of paper, taking extra special care to make sure all her lines are straight. She eventually finishes the first drawing and waits for a moment to see if something happens, but nope, it's still an ordinary piece of paper. Coco doesn't understand where she could have gone wrong because she thinks it looks close enough to the drawing in the book. However, while she may be good at drawing straight lines, she clearly sucks at drawing circles, because that circle isn't connected at all. Fortunately, just as she is about to give up, a drop of ink falls from the pen, connecting the lines of the circle, and as soon as the circle has been completed, the page lights up right before Coco's eyes, filling the room with bright and colorful fireworks. This is a major breakthrough for Coco because the fact that she was actually able to draw a spell means it's not impossible for her to become a witch. However, she can't go telling anyone about her discovery because Quaifree seemed very insistent about not wanting anyone to see him cast his spell, so if he finds out that she saw him, he might be mad. For now, Coco decides to continue practicing with more magic circles, and out in the forest, Quaifree is camping out with a fire spell going to keep himself warm. But he can't help but think back to what Coco said about a random witch selling a picture book to her, and a moment later, he sits up in shock because he finally realizes what that picture book was. Back in Coco's room, a few hours have passed, and she has just discovered the fire spell. But having a fire indoors is really dangerous, so she rushes to put it out before something bad happens. After conducting several experiments, Coco is finally starting to understand how the magic circles work. The bigger the circle is, the stronger its effect will be, and said effect lasts a lot longer if the circle is drawn perfectly. That said, keeping the drawing neat while increasing the size is a bit of a challenge for her, especially with the more complicated ones, so it will probably take a lot of practice before she gets as good as Quaifree is. Just then, Coco comes up with the brilliant idea of tracing the magic circle directly from the book to make it easier to draw, and sure enough, with this method, she perfectly replicates one of the most complicated spells in the book. Just as she finishes tracing the spell and it begins to light up, Quaifree appears behind her and drags her out the window as he yells in her face, asking what spell she just used. Coco tells him she doesn't know because she was just tracing a new one from the book, but as they look back at the house, it is slowly being covered in a thick layer of crystals. Coco's mother had heard all the commotion and came out to see what was going on, but she couldn't see the crystal forming behind her in time, and before she could escape, her foot made contact, and just like that, Coco's mother is caught. Coco watches in horror as the spell she activated engulfs her mother, and she desperately tries to get down to go help her, but Quaifrey holds on and tells her that it's no use because that was a forbidden spell, and there's nothing that can be done now. Before Kifrey can even finish speaking, Coco kicks her way free from his grip and begins free-falling to her doom, so Kifrey rushes down to break her fall before she gets hurt. Coco then tries to save her mother, but her entire body has already been sealed in the crystal, and the spell keeps spreading, so if she stays there, she will be caught up in it as well. Kifrey grabs Coco and flies away to make sure that doesn't happen, and once they are in the air, Coco begins apologizing with tears in her eyes because she didn't know that spell would do all this. Kifrey doesn't blame her because it's natural that she wouldn't know how dangerous the spell was, and that's exactly why witches are forbidden from sharing the secret of magic with the public, to prevent accidents like these. In truth, all that's needed to cast magic is special ink and a magic circle pattern, but now that Coco knows about it, he has no choice but to erase her memory. After hearing what he just said, Coco begs him not to wipe her mind, because if he does that, then it means she will forget about her mother as well as all the pages of the picture book that she memorized, and if that happens, then no one will be there to save her mother after that. Quaifrey understands her plight, but the memory wipe is necessary to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. However, he then realizes that the picture book Coco mentioned is now sealed in the crystal as well, and without it, he won't have any leads in tracking the witch down. The fact that Coco has memorized the book might be his best bet at tracking him down. Coco asks if finding that witch will allow them to undo the crystal spell and save her mother, and Kifrey says there's a chance, so Coco begs him to let her help because she will do anything to save her mom. In that case, Quaifrey tells her that if she wants to keep her memories of the secrets of magic, then she is going to have to undergo training to become a proper witch. The next morning, Kifrey takes Coco back to his atelier, and he tells her she doesn't need to worry about her mom, because he placed a barrier around the area to keep others out. That way, no one else will get caught up in the spell, and Coco's mom will be preserved in case they find a way to reverse the damage. After being reminded of what happened, Coco breaks down in tears because this is all her fault, and seeing this, Quaifrey comforts her, explaining that she had no way of knowing that the spell was dangerous in the first place. He leads her into the atelier and grabs a device which creates a large ball of water. He tells Coco she can wash up with this while he goes to get her a change of clothes, but Coco doesn't really know how to use this thing, and after what happened, she's scared to touch magic that she doesn't understand. Just then, a little girl named Techia comes around the corner, and she tells Coco that there's nothing to fear, because as far as spells go, that one is pretty harmless. She explains that it is called a vapor bubble, and it works by drawing moisture out of the atmosphere to create a ball of water. She also demonstrates how to use it by tipping it over to pour out some water. Coco is really grateful for the explanation, so she thanks Techia. But Techia is even more grateful to Coco because she rarely gets a chance to explain magic tools to others, so this was fun for her. Just then, a girl named Richa walks over with a quill and ink in hand, and Coco recognizes those as the instruments for casting magic, so she asks if Richa and Tetia happen to be witches. Techia explains that they are just apprentices learning from Master Quaifrey, but now that she mentions it, Techia wonders who Coco is supposed to be. She asks if she's an apprentice as well, but Coco thinks it's a little too early to call herself that, especially since before yesterday, she had no idea what magic really was. Hearing this, Tetia and Risha go silent because they now realize that Coco is the girl from the rumor they heard about. Coco doesn't understand what they are talking about, so she asks what rumor they are referring to. And the two of them explain that the rumor says there is an outsider who made use of forbidden magic and was then allowed to become an apprentice, which is completely unheard of. Just then, Kiefer returns with a new set of clothes for Coco, and he's glad to see that the kids are all getting along more or less, but he asks Techia and Richie to hurry up and finish their morning chores. He then tells Coco that she should change into the uniform he prepared, because that's what all of his students wear, and after she's done with that, he promises to explain everything to her. Once Coco has gotten dressed, Quaifrey sits her down and prepares to give her a lesson on the history of magic, so he starts by explaining that magic wasn't always a secret. It used to be common knowledge that anyone could use whenever they wished, but unfortunately, while they may have had great power, they did not have great responsibility, so the world descended into chaos as wars broke out with forbidden magic. That's why a coalition of peaceful witches banded together and stole away humanity's memories of magic to prevent another tragedy from occurring. And that's why all witches must be very careful to preserve the secret. Coco now understands why Kaifri didn't want to let anyone see him cast his spell back when he was fixing the carriage, but she still doesn't know what forbidden magic is supposed to be. Schifri explains that it is magic that was created during the Age of War, specifically designed to hurt other people, like the spell with which they petrified Coco's mother. Coco grabs onto Kaifri and begs him to teach her about forbidden magic because she needs to understand it if she's ever going to free her mother. Normally, Kaifri would tell a student to be patient and wait to uncover more information as time goes on, but in Coco's case, he doesn't think that would be appropriate. So he tells her to follow him instead because he has something he wants to show her. There are many forbidden spells he could just list for her, but the general rule they follow is that any spell that is cast directly upon a human body is utterly prohibited, which is why modern witches always use some kind of tool to cast their spells. An example of this is the teleportation window that Kaifri keeps downstairs, and to demonstrate how it works, he lines up the runes on the circles until the scene shifts to a lake. Coco is amazed by this since she has never seen anything like it before. Kaifri explains that the portal simply links two pre-existing windows in the world, as long as they bear the same pattern. And this location is particularly special because that building over there in the distance is the Tower of Tomes. He explains that every time a book on magic is written, a copy instantly appears there, so the tower contains every single spell known to mankind, even the forbidden ones. Coco asks Kaifri to take her there because she wants to find out everything she can about that spell. However, Kaifri tells her it doesn't really work like that, because the tower is guarded by those monsters over there, along with 3 others, and it won't let you pass unless you've completed your trials as a witch. Thus, if Coco wishes to visit, she's going to have to do a lot of study. After that, Kaifri shows Coco where she will be staying from now on, and while he's here, he wants to introduce her to her new roommate, but unfortunately, Agat isn't around right now. Anyway, Kaifri takes Coco inside and explains that there is one workspace which she and Agat will have to share, but they each have their own personal bedrooms. He tells Coco to get some rest in the meantime since she has had a really long day, and if she needs anything, she should feel free to call him at any time. As Kaifri leaves, he makes a call to his higher-ups to fill them in on how things are going with Coco. He says she is settling in nicely, and he thanks them for approving her apprenticeship, but he hasn't been able to get around to asking for information on the witch that gave her the book yet, because he says he wants to wait until after Coco has gotten adjusted to her new life here. Meanwhile, Coco is busy looking around her new room, and she is really excited because she never thought she'd get to see what a real witch's room looks like. But just when she's about to start touching stuff, she hears a voice telling her to keep to her side of the desk. Coco is startled because she doesn't know where that came from, but she looks up and sees a girl floating in the air above her. This is Agat, and starting today, she will be Coco's new roommate. But Agat already knows all about her since she's the famous outsider who's going to be joining as an apprentice today. Agat offers her condolences for what happened to Coco's mother, but she also doesn't hide the fact that she thinks it was Coco's fault to begin with. Coco understands that she was the cause of that accident, which is why she wants to become a witch so she can fix it. But hearing Coco say she wants to become a witch so casually annoys Agat because being a witch isn't a simple task. It takes hours and hours of drawing spells each and every day, just so you can pass the trial and become a mage. And personally, Agat doesn't think an outsider like Coco has what it takes to become a witch. Coco admits that she's not sure if she will make a good witch or not, but she is going to at least try, and Agat responds by telling her that she's going to have to prove herself then. She says training will start tomorrow, but for now, it's time for dinner, so Tedia and Riche come to call Coco down to eat. A little while later, everyone gathers at the dinner table to eat, but Agat says she won't be joining them, so she's eating in her room right now. Kaifri doesn't intend to force her to come out, but he does wish that Agat would spend a little more quality time with the rest of them. Anyway, he says they had better start eating before the food gets cold, so Coco takes a bite of the bread, and she is surprised by how soft and tasty it is. Tedia tells her that all the food they eat is made by Kaifri, and he is a really good cook, so they enjoy wonderful meals like this every day. Later on, Coco settles into bed for her first night as a witch apprentice, but even though this is a dream come true for her, she can't feel happy about it after losing her mother. The next day, Coco wakes up bright and early to begin studying because she needs to prepare to pass those trials, but that's going to be a little difficult considering the fact that she doesn't even know what the trials are to begin with. Just then, Kaifri appears behind Coco, and he tells her that there's a lot about magic she won't be able to learn by simply reading a book, which is why it is best to learn by getting some real-world practice. And for that very reason, He has brought her the basic starter kit that every young witch needs to cast a spell. Coco is a bit hesitant to attempt to use magic again because she's worried that something might go wrong like last time, but she needs to get over it since she can't save her mother unless she masters magic, so she asks Hugh Frey to begin teaching her because she's ready to learn. 5 textbooks later, Coco is officially tired of learning, and she's trying to power through it, but she didn't realize studying magic would be this boring. Quifrey suggests they should take a small break for now, so he asks Coco if she can summarize everything he has taught her so far. Coco agrees, so she begins by explaining that a spell is composed of 3 elements: the sigil at the center, which determines the element of the spell, the signs that determine the direction and force of the spell, and the outer circle that activates the spell. There are also a bunch of complicated rules and exceptions that Coco had to memorize as well, but now that she's got the basics down, it's time for her to practice drawing spells. Quifrey stands behind her to cheer her on the entire time, but when Coco is done, she's too embarrassed to show him, so she attempts to throw it in the trash. Quifrey stops her and grabs the page out of her hand to take a look, but Coco really doesn't want him to see it because the lines are all wobbly and messy. Quifrey says he already expected that from her, and it's nothing to be ashamed of because she's still learning, and in order to learn, you need to let yourself make mistakes. And speaking of mistakes, Quifrey points to a spot on Coco's magic circle where she failed to join the ends of the circle. He explains that while drawing a perfect circle will improve the spell's efficiency, the most important step is making sure that the circle is completely connected, otherwise the spell won't activate. He tells her to try connecting the lines, so Coco does it, and a second later, a water jet spell activates, blasting Agot right in the back from across the room. Coco begins frantically apologizing because she didn't mean to do that, but Agot says it's fine because it doesn't bother her. She even takes the time to point out that Coco made one of her signs longer than the others, which is why her spell shot out in that direction. Quifrey commends Agot for her observation, and he is certain that he made the right decision, leaving her in charge of Coco. So he heads for the door and says he's going to be at the tower for a while because there's something he needs to check. And once he's gone, Agot tells Coco that it's time for her to prove herself, because unlike with Quifrey, she won't be giving Coco any breaks. Meanwhile, Quifrey has just arrived at the Tower of Tomes, so he descends into the first layer. But just as he lands, he is pulled down by someone behind him, and it turns out to be one of his old friends, Alara, messing with him for fun. It has been a while since they last saw each other, so Quifrey is glad to see her again, and she mentions that she heard all about his new little apprentice. She asks if he thinks she will be able to lead them to the brimmed caps, since it has been over 4 years since anyone has used forbidden magic, but Quifrey says that wasn't the only reason he chose to take Coco as an apprentice, and technically, Coco isn't even officially his apprentice yet because she hasn't completed her first test yet. After all, the tests are held at the Darda Range, and at this time of year, the elevation there is going to be at its highest point. So Quifrey says it would be way too dangerous for a new apprentice since she could get herself killed. Meanwhile, back at the Atelier, Agot has just set the portal to connect to the Darda Range, and she plans to send Coco there to practice. Coco is a little hesitant since this doesn't seem like the kind of thing they should be doing while Quifrey is away, but Agot tells her to stop being such a baby because she's going to have to complete this test eventually if she wants to be an apprentice, and personally, Agot managed to do it back when she was only 10 years old. The first test is called Consent of the Crown, and basically, Coco is going to be given 3 items which she must use to reach the summit of the range and pick one of the flowers there all by herself. Agot hands her a magic guidance orb to lead her towards the summit, and a vapor bubble to use for drinking water, and considering the fact that Coco is a novice, those items are probably all she knows how to use. She's about to send Coco off on her test, but before she does, Coco speaks up and asks if she could have a pair of shoes like Agot. She is technically allowed to bring one more item with her, so she was hoping she'd get to try flying like she saw Quifrey and Agot do. She apologizes if something like that is too much to ask for as a newbie, and normally, earning a pair of shoes like that takes a long time, but Agot actually concedes and offers to let Coco borrow her own shoes. However, that's the only nice thing she's going to be doing for Coco, so she shoves her through the portal, and just before it closes, she mentions that if Coco fails this test, then she will automatically be disqualified as an apprentice and be required to leave the atelier for good. Coco is terrified after being left in an unfamiliar forest all alone, but she needs to do her best to pass this test, so she gets up and prepares to make her way through it. The guidance orb seems to work by pointing in the direction that she needs to go, so Coco starts following its lead, but walking through a forest alone is really hard. She eventually manages to make it out into the plains, but she is left utterly shocked by what she sees because large chunks of land are floating in the air, and the guidance orb is pointing into the sky. She takes a seat on one of the logs and starts thinking about what she's going to do next because she had no idea her destination would be floating several hundred meters in the air, and she has no idea how she's going to get up there. But just then, she remembers that she borrowed Agat's flying shoes, and these are perfect for this situation. She jumps up and prepares to take off, but then she realizes that she doesn't actually know how to make the shoes work. She takes another break to spend some time examining the shoes, and from what she can see, each shoe has half of a casting seal drawn on it, so she assumes that it will activate if she joins them. She decides to test her theory, and the second she joins her feet together, she leaves the ground and begins floating midair. She is overjoyed by the fact that she finally figured out how to fly, but all that excitement causes her to get distracted, and moments later, she loses her balance and crashes into some nearby bushes. Meanwhile, down in the Great Hall, Kefre has just put in a request for a few items, and while he's waiting for his request to be processed, Alara mentions that he wouldn't have to put in a request each time if he simply lived here in the Great Hall like her and the others. After all, it has everything a mage could ever need, but Kefre happens to hate the Great Hall quite a bit, so he refuses to stay here any longer than necessary, no matter what she says. Alara agrees to drop the subject, and since he's heading back home, she reminds him to keep an eye on those apprentices of his because when kids are that age, they can get into all sorts of trouble if they are left on their own. Meanwhile, out in the plains, Coco is still trying to figure out how to fly, and so far, she has gotten the hang of floating off the ground slowly, so she decides to try going a little higher. But when she attempts to land on one of the floating rocks, she loses her balance and comes tumbling down. A fall from this height would definitely kill her, so Coco is freaking out trying to stabilize herself, but just before she falls to her doom, she manages to grab onto a hanging vine to save herself. She's hanging on for dear life when she suddenly spots this white worm thing, and it crawls right over her face, so she freaks out and ends up falling into the water below. After making it to dry land, Coco tries to clean up Agat's shoes because they've got mud all over them now, but as she's cleaning, she notices that one of the flight spells on the sole is gone now, meaning she must have wiped it off accidentally, so she's starting to panic. She remembers that she's still got her quill and ink, so she can just draw the spells back onto the shoes, but when she checks her bag, she is mortified to find out that her ink was ruined as well. And now she's really out of options. Back at the atelier, Tedia goes up to Agat and asks if she has seen Coco anywhere, because it's almost dinner time. Agat casually tells her that Coco is at the Darda Plains to complete her test, and Tedia is shocked to hear that because there's no way Coco is ready for that kind of test when she just got here yesterday. However, Agat reminds her that the rest of them completed that test before they were even allowed to join the atelier, and she doesn't think it's fair that Coco gets to train alongside her without putting in as much effort as she did, especially since she's an outsider. Even so, Tedia still doesn't think it's fair to put Coco's life in danger just because she's holding a grudge against her, but Agat says it's not that big of a deal. The Darda Plains are currently at their peak this time of year, so even with the flying shoes she borrowed, there's no way Coco could ever make it to the summit. She assumes Coco will give up soon once she realizes that it's impossible and return to the atelier, but she severely underestimated how determined Coco can be because she is currently sailing across the water in a boat she found, and she looks like she's got a plan. Tetia is really worried about Coco, but Richa doesn't seem too bothered by what happened, and it's not that she doesn't care about Coco, but realistically, there's nothing they can do until Kefre gets back. Meanwhile, Coco is still out in the boat, attempting to climb back onto one of the floating rocks, but no matter how much she tries, she can't reach it. She has also tried drawing the flight seals back onto the shoes with what was left of the ink, but that didn't work because the shoes are all wet, so the ink kept smudging off. Just then, Coco wonders if she could make it work if she drew the spells directly on her feet, but just as she was about to attempt it, she remembers that Kefre said drawing spells on a person is forbidden, and she doesn't know what will happen if she tries, so she decides against it. That said, she has absolutely no idea how she's going to accomplish her goal, so she's starting to believe that Agat was right about her not being good enough to be a witch. After all, the rest of them have been drawing spells since they were little kids, while Coco has never had any training of the sort, so she could never hope to compete against them. Just as Coco is about to give up, she is reminded of her time with her mother and how she used to teach her how to measure fabric with chalk, and while she never thought much of it, her skills were apparently good enough for Kefre to compliment her back then, so she might still be able to make this work. She heads out into the forest to find some rocks, and after tying a piece of cloth around one, she dips the end in some of the magic ink. She then takes her cape and begins drawing on it with the same precision she would when measuring fabric. And after spending the whole night drawing, Coco eventually creates a sigil which should work, even if it's not the most refined. Just as she's about to try it out, the white worm thing from yesterday wakes up, and after spending all night near Coco, it has really warmed up to her, so she decides to bring it along. Now all that's left for her to do is complete the casting ring, and the second she does, a heavy wind begins blowing through the sails, but it doesn't have the effect Coco was hoping for because instead of going up, the boat begins gliding over the water at high speeds. The speed is so extreme that the hull of the boat cracks under the strain, leaving Coco dangling for dear life from the sail. But fortunately, she manages to stabilize herself. And even though she didn't plan this, she technically is flying, so a win is a win. Now, all she needs to do is make it to the summit, so she angles the glider upwards to gain altitude, and once she has the flowers in her sights, she reaches out to grab one. It takes a few attempts because she keeps missing the mark, and she nearly crashes a few times, but she eventually manages to pull it off. Meanwhile, back at the atelier, Kaifri has just returned, and he is mortified when he learns that Coco was sent to Darda for the test even though she's not ready. Normally, interfering isn't allowed once the test has begun, but unlike other apprentice witches, Coco hasn't been around magic all her life like them, so she never should have taken on the tests so soon. He opens the portal and prepares to go rescue her, but at that moment, Coco is already walking back with the flower in hand. They are all surprised to see that Coco is alright and managed to complete the test, especially Agat, who fully expected her to fail miserably. Coco walks right up to Agat and shows her the flower, still fully convinced that Agat was just trying to help her learn faster. But seeing Coco succeed like this when she has only known about magic for one day, especially after Agat intentionally set her up to fail, makes Agat feel like a massive loser, so she walks off without saying a word. Quifri would have to address that later, but for now, he walks up to Coco and warns her that it is incredibly dangerous to take on magic challenges before you are fully prepared, especially ones like this where she very easily could have ended up dead if she failed. He makes her promise never to do something reckless like that again, and Coco apologizes for it, but he's not really that mad about it. He just says it was unnecessary because he had already decided to accept Coco as his apprentice without the test, and to commemorate the occasion, he gives her the apprentice uniform he ordered, and Coco is overjoyed. But then her stomach starts growling because she hasn't had any food to eat since yesterday, so Tedia takes her upstairs to have some breakfast. Now that Coco is an official apprentice, Kifri has her practice working with the 4 core sigils: water, earth, fire, and levitation. While Coco is in the middle of practicing, she accidentally connects the circle a little too early, resulting in an out-of-control fireball. Coco doesn't know what to do in this situation, so she starts to panic. But fortunately, Tedia saves her by dumping water onto the fire, and Coco is grateful for her help. Now that the danger has been dealt with, Tedia asks Coco what she was working on in the first place, and Coco explains that she wants to be able to draw a perfect levitation circle, so she was practicing by drawing fire sigils first, but it didn't go so well. Kaifri comes over to give Coco a blanket to dry off, and he warns her to be especially careful when working with sigils of fire since its formless nature makes it rather unpredictable if mistakes are made, and Coco promises to be more careful in the future. Techa doesn't really understand why Coco is still trying to draw levitation sigils in the first place since she pretty much already mastered it while she was out in the Darda range. But while that may be true, she also ruined Agat's flight shoes out there. While she did manage to clean them up, she hasn't been able to draw the flight magic circle back on them because her lines are still all wobbly, and she can't return them to Agat until she has fixed them. Hearing that, Kaifri starts to wonder if the reason for Coco's wobbly lines might be the pen he gave her, because he pretty much just grabbed one from his collection at random for her, so she might have an easier time drawing spells if she picks out the pen herself. For that reason, he plans to take her to the magic stationery shop. Later on, Kifri takes Coco and the other girls to Cal, the closest witch town to their atelier, and once they touch down, Coco is amazed by just how many witches there are here. Kaifri explains that this city was originally built by witches to stop the giant mole worms that were local to this area, and as it grew in size, more and more witches gathered here over time, turning it into the witch town that they see today. That's a fascinating story, but Coco isn't paying attention at all since she's still too mesmerized to take her eyes off the surrounding witches. And Agat is still really salty about Coco passing the test, so she doesn't want to be around her right now and tells Quifri that she wants to go off on her own. Kaifri decides to let her go and just asks her to meet back up with them at the magic stationery shop, and once she's gone, he turns to Coco and asks her how things have been going with Agat lately, because from the looks of things, it's not great. Coco says she's not sure why Agat is so hostile towards her, but regardless, she hopes they can be friends someday. After that, Kaifri begins leading the group to the magic stationery shop, But Coco keeps getting distracted by all the creative ways that magic is being used here that she's starting to fall behind. So Tetia gets her attention and tells her to stick with the group because they wouldn't want to spend half the day looking for Coco if she got lost. Coco tries to stay focused, but then her attention gets drawn to a dark alleyway, and she is reminded of the alley where she was given that magic picture book, but just then. Tetia calls out to her again and asks her to hurry up before they get separated. They eventually make it to the stationery shop, and the first thing Coco notices is that there's a giant tree growing in the middle of the store, which she is amazed by since she has never seen anything like it before. Coco's reaction comes as a surprise to the shop owner since he has never seen an apprentice marvel at something as basic as silverwood. But Chufrey tells him he's going to have to cut Coco some slack since she's still pretty new to all this. Hearing that, the man realizes that Coco must be the girl from the rumors, who recently became an apprentice despite being an outsider, and considering that, it makes sense that she wouldn't know about Silverwood. Coco has no idea who this man is, and she doesn't know what to call him. So she's at a loss for words, but Tetia informs her that his name is Nonoa, and he is the owner of this shop. Nonoa then goes on to say that he and his grandson made all of the components sold in this store, and he can even extract ink at different concentrations if needed. Coco is still pretty confused since she didn't even know the ink needed to be extracted in the first place, so Nonoa offers to show her how it's done. Coco excitedly follows Nonoa up the stairs, but as she is walking, she happens to come across Nonoa's grandson, Tartar, while he's in the middle of carving a pen, and she is mesmerized by how focused he looks while he works, but she soon snaps out of it and continues up the stairs. On the top floor, Nonoa grabs a dying branch from the silverwood tree and places it in a beaker to begin the extraction process. After a few moments, the water turns jet black, and Nonoa explains that silverwood is usually pure silver in color when it's alive and healthy, but it quickly turns black upon death, and in this state it becomes toxic to both people and the tree itself. However, when dead branches like these are boiled, they release a liquid called cruel, and after extracting the excess moisture from the liquid, you get a nice, concentrated beaker full of conjuring ink. Kaifree then goes on to tell Coco that regular ink and conjuring ink are two very different things. Regular ink is usually made from the soot you get after burning wood, but conjuring ink is much more powerful because it's made from the silverwood tree's cruel, which is essentially its lifeblood. As such, the silverwood tree species is incredibly important to witches as a whole because they are used to make both ink and wands. Upon hearing Nonoa mention wands, Coco gets excited, and Nonoa asks if that's the reason they came here today. Coco confirms that she came to get a new wand, so Nonoa pours out a small bottle of ink and tells Coco to go try out a couple of wands to find the one that suits her best. The girls then wander off around the store to start looking for a wand for Coco, but just as she's about to begin searching, she looks outside the window and sees that masked witch who sold her the magic picture book standing there. The second she realizes who he is, the witch runs away, and she chases after him in hopes of finding out the name of the spell that crystallized her mother. The other girls try to stop Coco from running off, but it's already too late for that, and there's no time for them to go get Kaifree, because if Coco gets too far into the city on her own, then they might never find her. Meanwhile, out in the city, Agatha is busy doing some shopping when Coco accidentally runs into her, but she doesn't stop and keeps chasing the masked witch. Shortly after that, the other girls show up and tell Agatha that they need to go after Coco right away, so Tetia drags her along, and even though Agatha has no idea what's going on, she decides to go with it. Coco continues chasing the man through all sorts of twists and turns in the city's back alleys, and the girls are doing their best to keep up with her, along with Coco's pet, but all of a sudden, it notices a thick fog rolling in, so it stops, but the girls keep going, and the next moment, all of them disappear. Agatha finally manages to catch up to Coco, so she grabs her arm and demands to know why she's running. Coco tells her that she's chasing the man who gave her that book with forbidden magic in it, and she tries to point him out to Agatha, but when she turns around, he's already gone. Agatha thinks this has all been a massive waste of time, but when they turn to go back, Richie realizes that this place looks a lot different from the usual city alleyways. Additionally, the floors and walls are made of a white rock that isn't found in Kallen, which means they must not be in Kallen anymore. Tetia doesn't understand how that could be possible since she's sure they didn't run through a teleportation gate on the way here, and there's no way they could have been teleported out of the city directly. Tetia is sure this must just be a section of the city they've never seen before, so she says she's going to fly up to get a bird's eye view and figure out where they are. But Agatha doesn't think that's going to help because she's certain that this place isn't calm, and if they were really teleported here directly, then forbidden magic must have been used. Just then, Tetia comes back down screaming and tells everyone they need to get out of here right now. Agatha asks her to tell them what she saw, But Tetsuya tells her the problem isn't what she saw, it's the fact that it saw her, and it's on its way here right now. Meanwhile, the rogue witch is watching the group from atop a wall, and he hadn't really intended to bring anyone else besides Coco here. But he's just going to carry on as planned anyway and give Coco a proper welcome to the world of magic. A moment later, a large dragon lands right in front of the girls, and as this happens, the rogue witch says Coco is his one and only hope. Meanwhile, back in the city, Kifri is finally done with his shopping, so he asks Nonoa if he has any idea where the girls went. Nonoa says he's not sure since he hasn't seen them for a while, and he suggests that they might have gotten bored and gone out on a walk, but Kifri doesn't think that's possible. The girls are all so polite that there's no way they would leave the store without coming to say goodbye to Nonoa first, and Kifri is starting to get the feeling that something is terribly wrong here. Just then, Tartar comes up and tells them that if they are looking for the girls, he saw them leave the store chasing after a man in strange clothes who was covering his face with a picture of an eye. And as soon as Kifri hears that description, he realizes that it was the rogue witch, and he is now really worried because something bad might have happened to the girls. Meanwhile, in the middle of who knows where, the girls are being stared down by the dragon, and they are all paralyzed in fear, but Agat snaps them out of it and tells them the only way out of this is to maintain direct eye contact with the dragon while slowly backing away until they're out of its attack range. Following Agat's advice, they all back away slowly, and once they are far enough away, they all turn and start running as fast as they can, narrowly avoiding the dragon's bite. The dragon then begins chasing after them, and it's closing in on them, but Agat casts a fire spell to slow it down, and while the dragon is dazed, the group manages to escape into the maze. As they are running, Coco tells Agat that what she just did was amazing and asks how she drew that spell so quickly, but Agat tells her she didn't draw it back there at all. She just carries around a notebook full of partially drawn spells, so she only needs to connect the circle to activate it when necessary. Coco is fascinated by the idea and asks Agat to teach her later, but to do that, they first need to survive and get out of here in one piece. Unfortunately, they soon run into a dead end, and the dragon may not know where they are yet, but it's only a matter of time if they can't find a way out of here. Tetsuya begins having a panic attack because she doesn't want to die in a place like this, and she can't believe she got dragged into this mess because of Coco. But she doesn't want Coco to feel bad, so she stops herself from saying that last part out loud. However, Coco still gets the message loud and clear, and she can't even say anything about it because this really is all her fault. Agat calms Tetsuya down and tells her that they can still make it out of here. All she needs to do is cast a wall-breaking spell to get through, but it's going to take time. So she asks Tetsuya to make a distraction to buy her some time while she draws the spell. Tetsuya understands, so she draws a quick levitation spell and places it in her overalls to make them float, and after releasing them into the air, the dragon starts chasing after them, so that should buy them a decent amount of time. As she looks up, Coco happens to spot a magic circle inscribed on the ceiling, so she goes over to Agat and taps her on the shoulder to show her, but that causes Agat to mess up her magic circle, and she's royally pissed about Coco's interference. She yells at her and tells her, "You are never supposed to touch a witch while they are in the middle of casting a spell." Coco apologizes and tells her she didn't mean to do it, but that's not good enough for Agat, because Coco also didn't mean to petrify her mother, yet that woman is still stuck in stone right now. Apologizing doesn't fix mistakes, so she tells Coco to just stay quiet and do nothing so she doesn't mess anything else up. There's no time for Agat to start over, so she fears that they are going to have to try to find another way through the maze, but fortunately, Richie was also drawing the same spell, and she has just finished, so she successfully blows a hole through the wall, but Coco feels absolutely useless right now. Meanwhile, back in the city, Kifri and the others have been searching all over for Coco and the girls, but they are nowhere to be found, and they don't have many clues to go off since Tartar only managed to get a glimpse of them as they ran by. But just then, Coco's pet comes up to Kifri, and Kifri recalls that it was with Coco when she went missing, so he asks it if it can lead him to them. And the brush buddy starts running in the direction of where it last saw the girls, while Kifri follows close behind, praying that the girls are still safe. The dragon has caught on to Tetsuya's distraction now, and it's back to chasing the girls, but unfortunately, they haven't made much progress in their attempt to escape because they are right back at the point where they started. They don't have many other options now since the dragon might find them if they keep running. So Agat suggests they should find a place to lay low and hide for a while. They all eventually end up under an overpass, and Tetsuya is absolutely freaking out over the fact that she might actually die in here, and Coco tries to cheer her up a little, but there really isn't much of a bright side to look at when you're being hunted by a dragon, which is why Coco does the next best thing she can think of and gives Tetsuya her cloak. It may not be much, But Coco always feels more confident when she wears it because no matter how scared she may be, it reminds her that she at least looks like a witch on the outside. That's why she wants Tedia to have it, because if it helps her calm down even a little bit, at least then Coco wouldn't have been completely useless. Hearing Coco say that about herself, Tedia feels really bad, so she activates one of her spells which forms a fluffy ball around her and Coco, and inside, she apologizes to Coco for making her feel like this is all her fault. Coco tells her she has nothing to be sorry about since this genuinely is her fault, but still, Tedia hates the fact that she took her fear out on Coco when she's supposed to be the one protecting her since she has more experience. Coco doesn't want Tedia to feel bad, so she tells her she and the others have been doing a great job of protecting her. She also points out that this fluff ball thing is super comfortable, so she asks Tedia what spell it is. Tedia explains that this is one of her personal creations, and she came up with the idea because when she was younger, she used to dream about sleeping on the clouds, so she wanted to make that dream a reality. Granted, the spell still has a few kinks for her to work out, so it's not complete yet, but she hopes to submit it for approval as a general use spell someday. It may not be one of the most useful spells out there, but it's her dream, and Coco's dream is to become a witch and save her mother. Tedia tells her that neither of them should give up until they succeed. Just then, Agat pokes her head in, and she had heard the entire conversation, so she tells Tedia that there's nothing wrong with chasing her dreams, but if she really wants to create the feeling of sleeping on a cloud, then she's going to need to make this out of something more solid like cotton instead of actual clouds. But Tedia says that would ruin the whole point because it'd just be a regular mattress at that point. Tedia's spell aside, Agat tells them they have a more troublesome spell to worry about because it seems like there's a looping spell cast on this place that prevents them from leaving no matter how far they walk, and if they want to get out of here, they're going to need to find and destroy that seal first, but Agat hasn't got the foggiest clue on where to start looking. Just then, Coco speaks up and says she actually saw a magic seal on the roof a while ago, and after the others take a look as well, they all believe that must be the seal that's keeping them trapped in here. But with the dragon guarding it, they are going to have to find a way to take it out first. Agat begins preparing a few more fire spells to fight the dragon, but before she does, Coco stops her because she doesn't think that's going to work. The fire spell Agat used before definitely slowed the dragon down, but it didn't do much actual damage to it, and Agat has to admit that Coco has a point because dragons are naturally resistant to fire. She then asks Coco if she has any ideas on what kind of spell they should use to beat it instead, but Coco thinks fighting the dragon would be too risky, which is why she has a different plan in mind. She draws a diagram on the wall to show them her plan, and basically, she wants to use Tedia's spell to distract the dragon so they can get to the spell seal up there. After all, in a cold place like this, a reptile like the dragon is bound to want to go somewhere warm. Agat doesn't like the fact that the plan is basically to try and put the dragon to sleep, but as dumb as it sounds, it's technically possible, and both Tedia and Richie are already on board. The reason Coco came up with this plan is because Kufri told her that magic is something that is meant to make everyone happy, and if this works, then no one has to get hurt, and that philosophy strikes a chord with Agat. She also doesn't really have any other ideas in mind, so Tedia and Richie ask for her help because they have a much better chance of succeeding if they work together. Thus, Agat reluctantly agrees to work on Coco's plan with the others, and Coco is really happy to hear that. The first step to the plan is making Tedia's clouds solid enough to lie down on, but in this case, the user is going to be a dragon, so they are having a hard time thinking of what to make it out of. Tedia considers using shredded paper, but they've only got 4 small notepads with them, so Coco and Richie suggest they could use their clothes or their hair. Agat tells them that neither option would work since it's nowhere near enough for a dragon, and even if it were, would they really want to give up their clothes and hair for this? They realize that Agat has a point, so they start thinking of other materials they could use, and eventually, Agat comes up with the idea to use sand. Back when Richie drew the wall breaker spell, it turned the materials in the wall into fine sand, and fine sand is fairly soft when you lay down on it, so it should work. Agat begins working on a seal to make the sand as fine as possible, and once she's done, she shows it to Tedia, so she can start creating copies. Coco is surprised by how fast Richie is able to cast her spells, but small seals are her specialty. While Richie is busy with that, Agat asks Tedia to come up with a spell to gather as much sand in the center of the plaza, and Agat plans to work on a spell to keep everything contained. As she's walking away so she can get started, Coco calls over to her and asks if there's anything for her to do, and while Agat does think Coco's plan is good, Coco's spell drawing skills still aren't good enough for her to be trusted with a spell under high stakes, so to prevent any unfortunate accidents, Agat tells her to just stay put for now. Coco decides to listen to Agat and just sits in a corner while the others work, but a little while later, she gets bored and picks up one of Agat's trash spells, and when she takes a look at it, she is amazed by how perfect Agat's circle is. She really wants to find out how Agat does it, so she slowly walks over, making sure to stay far enough away so she doesn't mess up Agat's spell, and once she has a clear view, she sees that Agat uses a special technique to draw her circle. She traces the circle out in the air first, and then she follows that line all in one smooth motion, and the others seem to be doing the same thing as well. Coco had never really put much thought into how she drew her circles before, so she wants to try it out and takes out her pen to practice, which, considering how much she has messed up so far, might not be the best idea. Fortunately, nothing goes wrong, but later into the night, none of the others have managed to come up with any good spell ideas for how to create a cushion out of the sand. At such a large scale, a compression spell would make the sand too hard, but an air seal like the one Techia used wouldn't be strong enough to hold the dragon's weight, so they are all completely stumped. Just then, they notice a light coming from that direction, and that's when they see that Coco has just created a fireball. Agat is a little confused and asks Coco why she's casting a fireball at a time like this, but Techia and Richa, on the other hand, are both amazed because this is the first time that one of Coco's fireball spells has remained stable for so long, so they rush over to congratulate her and ask how she managed to do it. Coco says she just saw how the rest of them were drawing their circles and decided to practice her own, although it took her a lot of tries before she finally got it right. Agat isn't really impressed since anyone can learn how to draw a proper spell with enough repetition, but the mention of repetition gives her an idea. If they can't use a single spell to stabilize the sand pillow, then maybe they can use a repetition of multiple spells to get it done. They spend the next few hours coordinating the spells they will use and the plan of attack, and once it's time to move, they split up into teams, with Coco and Techia going off to one side of the maze, and Agat and Richie heading off to the other side. Once they get to their designated locations, they begin drawing the various wall breaker spells needed to create the sand, as well as the stabilization spell, and once Coco and Techia are done, they give Agat and Richa the signal to let them know that they are ready to complete the circles. Both parties then draw the final line, resulting in a huge explosion as the floors turn to sand, and as they run to safety, they gradually complete the circles on the other spells they drew along the way, until there is a massive cloud of sand in the middle of the maze. The plan goes flawlessly, and by the time the dragon notices the cloud, everyone has already made it a safe distance away, so they watch in anticipation to see if the spell will hold up. Agat's idea was to stabilize the cloud using a spell that will constantly try to return it to its original state, and by repeating that spell over and over. Even if the dragon's weight is meant to displace the sand, the restoration spell will oppose the change and keep it in its cloud shape. Thus, the dragon bed was complete, and the second the dragon lays down on it, it falls right asleep. Now all that's left is for them to sneak past the dragon and make it to the casting seal before it wakes up. They eventually make it up to the seal, but they have no idea what this spell even does since they've never seen anything like it before. That said, it's definitely what's keeping them trapped in here, so they should be able to leave once they break it. Meanwhile, back in Kallen, Kaifri makes it to the alley where Coco and the others went missing, but he can't find any signs of them at all. Just then, Tartar catches up to him as well, and he is a bit confused since he could have sworn that this alleyway used to have a pavement running through it, but now it's just dirt. After hearing him say that, Kifri immediately goes to inspect the broken pavement stones nearby, and sure enough, there are casting seals on them. But just as he lifts one up, it suddenly activates and pushes him and Tartar back. The reason the spell activated was because on the other side, Techia had broken the circle, so now the spatial seal keeping this place together is coming apart and sucking everything out. On the bright side, there is now an opening to the outside world, so they should be able to escape now, but unfortunately, all the commotion also happened to wake the dragon up, and it is not happy. It slams its tail into the tower, knocking Agat off, and since she doesn't have her flight shoes right now, a fall from this height would definitely kill her if the dragon doesn't get to her first. But fortunately, Kifri showed up just in time and saves her, and after flying back up top, he takes out a spell and proceeds to absorb all the water from the clouds in the sky, turning them into a giant water dragon which he uses to take down the dragon and knock it out. By the end of it all, Agat, Techia, and Richie are all safe with Kaifri, but Coco is nowhere to be found, and that's because the rogue witch got to her first. She is currently unconscious, but he tells her how pleased he is that the seed he planted all those years ago has finally taken root, and he is glad that his little test helped her grow so much as a magic user. So he's going to give her a little gift in the form of knowledge that Kifri would never teach her. By the time Coco opens her eyes, she is back in Kalhan with Kifri and the others standing over her. They tell her she was found unconscious on the stairs of the tower, and Kaifri asks her if the brimmed cap did anything to her. But Coco doesn't really remember what happened back there, so she can't really say. Moments later, Nono arrives, and he is happy to see that the girls are all safe. But Kaifri tells him he has a favor he would like to ask. He points him towards the casting seals the brimmed cap made, and he asks Nonoa to look into what kind of ink was used. Nonoa promises to get to the bottom of it, but then Kifri adds another condition and asks him not to report this to the knights. This catches Nonoa off guard since it is their duty as witches to report all instances of forbidden magic. But Kaifri gives him a cold look and tells him to keep this a secret, and evidently, Nonoa is more scared of Kaifri than he is of the knights, so he agrees to stay quiet, but he has a feeling this isn't going to end well. After everyone returns home, life goes on as usual, and Coco continues practicing her spells, although Agat is greatly annoyed by how loud Coco is being. That said, Agat has come to respect Coco's efforts a little, so instead of yelling at her like she normally would, Agat decides to leave the room to go practice somewhere else instead. She heads out into the plains and stands on a ledge with her eyes closed to practice drawing a light spell, and she does manage to activate the spell, but she's not particularly happy with how it turned out, since the light pillar is weak and unstable, so she still has a lot of work ahead of her before she's able to draw spells as easily as Kaifri does. As for how Coco's practice is going, she's getting really frustrated because all her lines are coming out wobbly since she never got a chance to pick out a pen for herself in Colin. She's able to draw straight lines with the pigment stone thanks to all of her fabric expertise, but the stone is too big for small pieces of paper. She is also disappointed in herself for not being able to cast a single useful spell back when they got caught in the trap, but she is determined to keep trying until she learns how to use the quill. Or at least that's what she'd like to say, but she's way too tired right now, so she's about to lie down for a quick nap. But all of a sudden, Kaifri shows up and warns her that she'll catch a cold if she sleeps out here. Coco is startled because she had no idea that he was even here, and she tells him she didn't mean to fall asleep, but she clearly looks tired. She tells Kifre that she's worried that she will never be able to complete the test at the Tower of Tomes at this rate because she hasn't been making any progress lately, and Kaifri can see that she's quite upset, so to cheer her up, he asks her to come with him for a little bit. Kaifri takes Coco to the kitchen and pulls out a pot of stew he made, which he has been meaning to use, and he asks Coco to take a bite. Coco tries the stew, and she absolutely loves it, but then Kifri tells her he made that stew 2 years ago, and Coco starts to panic a little. He assures her that the stew is perfectly safe to eat because the pot has a refresh spell on it that keeps the stew as it was the day it was made. He does need to redraw the spell every so often to make sure the effects don't wear off. He then takes out a bunch of kappa yams, and he asks Coco if she would like to try baking one since she recently learned the fireball spell, and Coco is more than happy to accept the challenge. She gets to work and starts drawing while Kaifri works on cooking dinner, and after a little while, Coco manages to put together a perfect fireball spell. But when she tries to place the yam on it to cook, the yam falls right into the spell and puts the fire out. She doesn't understand why it didn't work, so Kaifri explains that the yams are quite heavy, so they require a levitation spell to keep them floating over the flame. Coco decides to give it a try, but after she has made the changes, she realizes that she went overboard on the levitation because now the yam is nowhere near the fire. She tries several variations, including one that accidentally creates a pillar of fire that burns the yam to ash, but Kifri encourages her to keep trying until she gets it right. Eventually, Coco does manage to make the perfect fireball spell, and after letting the yam cook for a bit, she takes it out with some tongs and tells Kaifri she's done with his assignment. Kifri congratulates her for doing such a great job, and succeeding at something seems to have brightened Coco's mood just as he had hoped. Kifri tells her a little story about what it was like for him while he was still learning about magic. The first type of magic he mastered was water magic, mostly because he didn't know how to swim and hated getting wet, so he wanted to find a way to use magic to avoid having to do washing chores himself. He tells Coco that when you're trying to develop a spell, laziness is a good driving motivation if applied correctly, so he instructs her to try finding ways to apply magic in her daily life to make it easier, and gradually she will start to get a feeling for it after creating enough spells. A few moments later, Techa and Richa both come into the kitchen because they could tell that Kaifri was cooking in here, and they can't wait for lunch anymore, so they ask if they can help. Several minutes later, with a few finishing touches from Coco's fire spell, the food is finally ready. Before they all dig in, Coco suggests they could eat outside today since the weather is so nice, and Kaifri likes the idea since it has been a while since he had a picnic. So he goes to prepare the other things they'll need, and Coco goes to call Agat to ask her if she wants to come out for a picnic with them. Agat says she was planning to work while she ate, so she's going to pass on their little outing, and besides, She tells them that the weather outside is actually terrible right now. Coco and the others had no idea it had started raining, and they are disappointed that their picnic plans have gone down the drain. But Chiefrey doesn't understand why they look so upset, because they've literally got magic to fix this exact problem. And after seeing this, the girls get excited again because the picnic is back on. They all head out together under Chiefrey's umbrella spell, and after finding a good spot to lay down, they all start eating and they're having a great time overall. But Coco thinks it would be even better if Agat got to share the fun with them. So after the rain stops, she decides to go call Agat to join them outside. However, when she finally gets back to the atelier, instead of Agat, a strange man answers the door, and he seems like he's in a bad mood. Coco is startled and a little scared, but fortunately, Chiefrey was close behind her, so she runs up to him. Chiefrey apparently recognizes the man and apologizes for not being home to meet Olruggio, and when Olruggio asks who Coco is, she tells him she's Chiefrey's apprentice, but Olruggio doesn't seem happy to hear that. He asks why Chiefrey would go and accept an apprentice behind his back while he was gone, but Chiefrey says he has a perfectly good explanation for all this. He tells Olruggio that Coco's case is rather special, because she was a victim of forbidden magic, but the second Olruggio hears that, he cuts Chiefrey off and grabs Coco before walking away. Chiefrey asks him what he's doing, and Olruggio says he doesn't want anything to do with the brim caps, so he's going to hand Coco over to the knights so they can deal with this instead. However, there's no way Chiefrey is going to let that happen. So he immediately stops talking and draws a water spell that blocks Olruggio's path and tells him to let Coco go because he doesn't want the knights to hear about any of this, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to stop him. That's a threat that Olruggio does not take lightly because he knows what Chiefrey is capable of, so he stops, and Chiefrey suggests they should talk this out inside. Once everyone is inside, Chiefrey explains everything that happened before he accepted Coco as his apprentice, and since this is Coco's first time meeting him, Chiefrey explains to her that Olruggio is the atelier's watchful eye. Basically, he's an inspector sent to rural ateliers to make sure all the Magic Society rules are being followed, and right now, Chiefrey is breaking one of the biggest rules. Chiefrey defends himself by explaining that if he had erased Coco's memories like he was supposed to, then he would have lost all leads on the whereabouts of the brim caps and their activities. But Olruggio reminds Chiefrey that it's not their job to investigate the brimmed caps in the first place. That's supposed to be the job of the Knights Moralis, and Olruggio strongly believes that Chiefrey should just let them handle it instead, but Chiefrey has no intention of backing down on this. Coco is really confused right now because she had no idea what the Knights Moralis are, so Chiefrey decides to give her a quick rundown. The Knights Moralis represent the order of moral spellcasting among witches, so they essentially gatekeep any magic that is deemed forbidden. If anyone is found to have dabbled in forbidden magic, they are captured and have their memories erased to ensure that the contents of forbidden magic remain secret. They are known for making no exception whatsoever, so if Coco was turned over to them, then they would without a doubt erase all of Coco's memories of magic, including her fondness for it. That scares Coco, but Chiefrey tells her that there's no need to worry because he knows she's a good girl, and if the Great Hall wants to erase her memories, then they are going to have to erase his memories as well. Seeing how serious Chiefrey is about all this, Olruggio relents and tells him he's free to do whatever he wants for now. But he warns Chiefrey that if anything goes wrong because of his decision, then he will snitch on him expeditiously. Now that all that has been settled, Chiefrey tells the girls to go wash up and get ready for bed. After Coco is done with her bath, she's about to head to bed and starts looking for her brush buddy to take him to bed with her. But to her horror, she sees her pet run right into Olruggio's bedroom. She needs to get the brush buddy back, so she nervously walks up to the door and is about to knock. But then she sees a sign on the door that says anyone who knocks on the door will be cursed. And considering the fact that Olruggio is a witch too, she's taking that warning very seriously, so she decides to go in without knocking. She steps into the room, and she's trying her best to be quiet while looking for Brush Buddy, but she accidentally sneezes, alerting Olruggio to her presence, and Coco is frantically trying to apologize for coming into his room without permission, but Olruggio seems more annoyed than angry. He can already tell what was going through her head when she came in. So he tells her that the sign on the door isn't an actual curse, and he just wanted to keep people out of his room. He also found the Brush Buddy a minute ago, so he returns him to Coco, and since Coco is still wet from her bath, Olruggio uses one of his magic rings to dry her off. Coco is amazed because she didn't know it was possible to make rings like that, but Olruggio has a bunch of them with different spells engraved, and he wouldn't want her to catch a cold under his watch. He then tells her to leave because he wants to get back to sleep, but just then, Coco squeals with excitement and bends down because the tiles here have glow magic built into them. She tells Olrugio that this was the first spell she ever saw, and it was what made her love magic in the first place, and it just so happens that the glowstone path was Olrugio's original creation. It works by having one stone layered over another, and applying pressure by stepping on it makes the ring and sigil overlap to activate the spell. He tells her it's not that impressive since anyone could do it, but Coco still loves this spell most of all because it was her first experience with magic, and though she wasn't able to use magic at the time, it still allowed her to dream, so she's very grateful to Olrugio. Olrugio didn't think his glowstone spell could have such a profound impact on someone, and seeing such pure joy on Coco's face is really starting to tug at Olrugio's heartstrings, but he still thinks Coco is bound to attract trouble, so he kicks her out of his room and tells her to get to bed already. The next day, it is still raining, and Agatha is having trouble concentrating due to all the noise, but even so, she has still managed to make some decent progress with her blind spell drawing since the light is more stable now, and at this rate, she is sure she will be able to pass her next test soon, and after that, she will be allowed to take part in outside missions. Just then, she hears a loud banging on the front door, so she goes to check it out, and she finds a panicked man begging Kifri for help. He says his son got caught in a flood near the bridge, and it's too dangerous for anyone else to get close to him without getting swept away. Kifri agrees to help and tells the man he will leave immediately, and he's about to tell the girls to wait here, because it's too dangerous for them. But Agathe says she wants to go with him, and she swears that she will make herself useful. Kifri tries to tell Agathe that it's not that simple, because there are going to be many other people present who aren't witches, and she hasn't even taken the test to make sure she knows how to cast spells in front of them without exposing the secrets of magic. However, Agathe cuts him off and tells him she has been practicing on her own for ages, and it's his job as a mentor to find opportunities for her to gain experience. Kifri understands that, but he still thinks it's a little too early to take Agathe out on a mission with him. However, Olrugio cuts in and tells Kifri that he's going to go ahead and follow the guy to the accident site so he can set up a gate, and he says he wants to bring Agathe along as his helper, which gets her really excited, so she runs off to go get her hat and coat. Kifri is about to object, but then the rest of the girls say they want to come as well, and Olrugio tells him that he needs to stop worrying so much because there are things the girls will never learn unless they get some real-life experience. Kifri understands that, but he's still worried about them, especially Agathe, because she tends to focus more on the frustrations of the things she can't do instead of celebrating what she can. And if she's not careful, her haste to grow up may lead her to take the wrong steps someday. A little while later, Olrugio and Agathe head out on horseback to follow the man to the crash site, and along the way, Olrugio tells Agathe to be careful not to drop his things since the ground around here is quite unstable. They eventually arrive at the site of the collapsed bridge, and the situation is as severe as the man had described because the carriage is on the verge of being swept away. The people are relieved when they see that the witches have finally arrived, and after assessing the situation, Olrugio takes his gate setup and hands Agathe the magic rings from his drying spell before asking her to go help the people dry off. Agathe is a little disappointed and asks if that's all he wants her to do because she was expecting more, but Olrugio reminds her that even the small tasks are important, and right now, there's not much for her to do here. There will be plenty of better opportunities for her to apply herself in the future, but for now, this is the best way for her to make herself useful. However, while Olrugio was simply stating the facts, Agathe ended up taking it as him treating her like an ignorant child, and she can't stand it because she has been working so hard to prove that she's a worthy witch, but she can't prove herself unless she is given the opportunity to do so. After Olrugio is done setting up the gate, Kifri and the others are able to come through, and they immediately get to work, with Olrugio flying down to the carriage to secure the children trapped inside, and Kifri flies ahead a little before taking a magic sword out and stabbing it into the river floor to stop the flow of water around the carriage. It looks very impressive, but while the sword may be stopping the water flow, Kifri does still need to put in a considerable amount of effort to keep it centered against the flow of the current, so he tells Olrugio to hurry up with the evacuation. Olrugio manages to get the first pair of kids out with no trouble, so he comes back to get the last one, and once that kid has been rescued, it's safe for Kifri to finally take the sword out and slash the raging river, creating a wave break to slow the current down to relatively safe speeds. Thankfully, everyone managed to make it out okay, and the man who called for help is extremely relieved to see that his son is alright. Custis apologizes for causing so much trouble, and explains that he was just trying to protect Dagga's products, but Dagga says none of that matters to him as long as he's okay. He then turns to Kifri and Olrugio and thanks both of them for their help, and Kifri says it was no problem at all. He also mentions that his apprentices brought some medicine with them, so if anyone here is injured, they'll be able to treat them. But then he turns back to see that all the girls are over by the trees, staring in awe at Kaifri's magic sword. Coco asks Kaifri what it is, so he explains that it is called Rain Cleaver, and it has dozens of small water spells inscribed on its blade, so it could easily split a small lake in two. The girls think it's amazing, and Tedia asks Kaifri if she can hold it for a bit, but he turns her down and says this thing is way too dangerous for kids to hold, at least not until they've been properly trained. Just then, Olrugio tells Kaifri he plans to go upstream to see if there's anyone in trouble there, and in that case, Kaifri says he will go check downstream, so he asks Tetia to come with him. And Olrugio takes Richo while Coco and Agat are asked to stay behind and help treat the injured people. Coco is more than happy to do so, but Agat doesn't seem too happy about being left alone with Coco. Coco can tell that Agat is upset at her for some reason, and she assumes it must be because she still hasn't fixed and returned her flight shoes yet, so she plans to do it as soon as possible. The people have been busy trying to recover whatever cargo didn't get swept away in the flood, and Custis just made the absolutely idiotic move to climb into a gap created by the water in the cliffside to go retrieve a box he spotted down there, completely forgetting about the fact that there's only a gap because the water eroded the cliffside, and that means it is incredibly unstable right now. However, before Dagda could convince Custis to get back up there, the inevitable happened and the cliff collapsed, pulling tons of debris right on top of Custis. Dagda is devastated by what just happened, and desperately tries to go down there to try to save Custis, but Agat stops him because it's too dangerous. Just then, Agat notices Coco's hat at the bottom of the ditch, and for a second, she's worried that Coco might have been buried alive in the landslide, but fortunately, she managed to make it out onto the edge of the water. However, Custis wasn't so lucky because he currently has a large boulder crushing him, and Coco is in no condition to help him right now. Dagda doesn't know what else to do in this situation, so he begs Agat to save Custis because she's his only hope. Agat takes a moment to think about the situation, and she sees this as the perfect excuse to do something important for once. Both Kaifri and Olrugio are away at the moment, and she doesn't have her flight shoes, so there's no way for her to go call them. And in addition to Custis's situation, Coco is in danger as well, so she has every justification to use magic under these circumstances. However, when she agrees to help, the people start gathering around, asking how she's going to save Custis. And all of a sudden, attention causes Agat's PTSD from being scrutinized by her former teachers to resurface. And what hurts the most is the memory of her mother basically banishing her from the family because she wasn't talented enough to live up to her expectations. Just then, Agat is snapped out of it by the sound of Coco's voice calling out to her, and Coco is asking if there's anything she can do to help from down there because she really wants to save Custis. Hearing Coco show so much genuine concern for Custis reminds Agat of what Olrugio said about not getting too impatient. She has been looking at this as nothing more than an opportunity to prove herself, but this is a life or death situation, and her top priority should be to make sure Custis survives. She calls out to Coco and asks her to give a full rundown of her current situation, and Coco explains that she's not injured and the current down here isn't life-threatening, so she's not in any immediate danger of getting swept away. The mud is making it impossible for her to pull herself up, so she's stuck here. As for Custis, he is currently unconscious, and from the looks of it, his leg must have been crushed into powder because that boulder pinning him down is absolutely massive. There's no way any of the adults would be strong enough to lift it by themselves, so the only way to save Custis is with magic. But unfortunately, Coco's bag got soaked in the water, so all her drawing tools have been ruined, and Agat isn't allowed to let normal people see her draw spells, so she can't do anything with them standing here. Meanwhile, in the Magic Tower, Aesthis receives a report that there has been an incident in a village on the outskirts of Callan. According to eyewitnesses, there was a huge pillar of water seen from the river, and it requires investigating, so they have to leave immediately. Meanwhile, at the base of the cliff, Coco has finally managed to climb out of the water, but her bag is still wet, so there's not much she can do. Just then, she comes up with an idea and asks Agat if she still has the drying magic rings Olrugio gave her, and Agat can tell what Coco is thinking. So she tosses the rings down to her, and once Coco has them, she starts using them to dry out her bag so she can draw spells with it again. However, even if Coco is able to use her tools again, she still can't draw any spells with all these people watching. Normally, when there are people around, a witch is supposed to draw by hiding their hands underneath their cloak so no one finds out how magic is cast, and while Agat may be able to do it, Coco can't, so she needs to come up with a way to distract the people to buy her some time. Agat then steps behind the people and gets all of their attention, introducing herself as Kaifri's most promising apprentice and promising that she will use her magic to make sure Custis makes it out of this all right. As she is speaking, She proceeds to draw a light spell underneath her cloak, sending a brilliant pillar of light into the sky and forming a light bird. This serves as both a beacon for Kaifri and Olruggio, and a distraction for the people so they won't see Coco cast any spells. However, down in the ditch, after drying her bag, Coco is about to start drawing the levitation spell she practiced, but she realizes that there's no way this is going to work. It's one thing to use the levitation spell on small objects, but if she wants to cast levitation on a boulder this big, then her paper isn't going to be enough. She starts working her way around the boulder to see if there's some way she can at least roll it off him instead, but then Custis regains consciousness, and Coco rushes to check on him. Custis doesn't recognize her at first because he's still in a daze, so Coco reminds him that she's one of the witches who came to help with the flood. Custis is relieved to hear that because a moment ago, he saw a glowing bird in the sky, so he thought he was dead for sure. Coco explains that it was just one of her friend's spells, and seeing the spell gives her an idea of how to get Custis out of here. Meanwhile, on the cliff, the people tell Agathe that her spell was very pretty, but it didn't really do anything to rescue Custis, so they ask if she really has a plan to rescue him. Agathe doesn't really know how to answer since she was just buying time for Coco to work, and Dagda is starting to get really impatient, so he says he's climbing down to save Custis himself. Agathe tries to stop him because it would be a disaster if he saw Coco drawing a spell down there, but fortunately, Coco had already rescued Custis and floated back up to the surface. Everyone is relieved to see that Custis is alive, and Coco is just glad to be back to safety, so she hugs Agathe as soon as she sees her. Agathe asks her how she managed to get Custis out of there, but then she notices a bunch of sand on Coco's clothes, and Coco explains that seeing Agathe's light bird reminded her of the dragon from that trap, and how they used the Wallbuster spell to create all that sand, so she just used that spell to destroy the boulder. Overall, she's just glad that she was able to save Custis, and someday, she's going to save her mom as well, no matter how long it takes. And for the first time, Agathe actually feels some genuine respect for Coco. However, a moment later, the two of them are suddenly tied up by a ribbon and pulled into the air. Coco has no idea what's going on, but Agathe recognizes the outfits of the witches holding them captive as those of the Knights Moralis, and if the Knights are here, then they are in serious trouble. The Knights immediately accuse them of being in association with the Brimmed Caps, and Agathe tries to tell them that they are wrong because both she and Coco are witch apprentices. However, Aesthis points to the spell that was just cast, and Coco's eyes go wide when she looks down because she remembers only drawing a wall-breaking spell, yet the entire cliffside has been turned to sand, and the river itself has been vaporized. She has no idea how this could have happened, but the Knights say that it's pretty clear that she must have used forbidden magic, and in accordance with witch law, she will now receive punishment. Coco desperately tries to explain that she didn't cast any forbidden magic, but Aesthis refuses to listen and prepares to use the memory erasure spell. However, before he could do so, Richie flies in and tackles his arm while Techa burns the ropes that are binding Agathe and Coco, but those ropes were also the only thing keeping them in the air, so as soon as they're gone, they end up falling to the ground. Fortunately, Tetia had already set up her sand bed, so they were able to land softly, and the girls try to tell Aesthis to just wait and listen, but he is dead set on erasing Coco's memories because he is convinced that she must have used forbidden magic. However, he goes silent when Kiefer shows up because the first thing he does is press his water blade against his neck. Aesthis and Quaifrey don't get along well, but Aesthis knows how much of a threat Quaifrey can be when he's angry, especially when it comes to his students, so he's much more open to talking now. He explains that one of Quaifrey's students used a spell that was strong enough to alter the ground itself, and spells of that nature were outlawed after the Age of War, so if Coco really used a spell like that, then she has clearly broken the law. Quaifrey argues that he never gave Coco any tools strong enough to create a spell of this nature, but be that as it may, Aesthis says it's still possible that one of the Brimmed Caps may have given it to her, and Quaifrey doesn't have an answer for that since there was a period of time that Coco was left alone with the Brimmed Cap. Just then, Olruggio yells at the Knights and tells them to quit floating around and to come down and help because before anything else, a witch's duty is to protect the general public, and there are a lot of people down here who need protecting right now. Aesthis can't really argue with that logic, so he agrees to postpone the trial until after all the normal people here have been taken care of. The Knights then head down and start helping dig everything out of the sand, and one of the Knights helps bandage Custis's injured legs. Custis's father asks her if that's going to heal his son's injuries, but she informs him that all she can do is stop the bleeding for now, but he isn't satisfied with that. He asks her if she can heal him with magic because he has seen witches regenerate objects before, so there should be no reason they can't do the same for a person. And he's right, it is possible to heal a person with magic, but she's not allowed to use magic like that out here. So she tells him to unhand her and explains that she will be taking Custis to the city of Calm so a doctor can patch him up, but if he's not satisfied with that, then she will just have to leave him here. Custis's father realizes that he has no other options, so he agrees to let her take Custis. After that, they finish up with the rescue, and after the rest of the civilians have been made to leave the area, Aesthis says it's time for them to resume the investigation, which makes Coco a little nervous. Aesthis has Coco replicate the spell she drew earlier with his personal pen and ink, and after Coco completes the spell, all it does is exactly what it was intended to, destroying a small section of rock, and Coco's technique with the spell wasn't particularly noteworthy either, so it's clear that she couldn't have created a spell powerful enough to cause all this damage. Aesthis can't deny that as things stand, there's no evidence that Coco was the one behind the spell, but just to be sure, he demands that she show him her hands because brimmed caps sometimes tattoo magic circles onto their bodies to allow them to amplify the effects of their spells, but Coco's hands are completely tattoo-free. The only thing there are the calluses from all the spells she has been drawing, but every beginner mage has those. As a matter of fact, Aesthis finds it odd that Coco has so few calluses, because most beginner mages develop calluses over years of studying and training. But Coco's look like she started using magic for the first time barely a month ago. However, just as he makes this realization, Quaifrey tells Aesthis that he has done quite enough, so he should be leaving soon. And Aesthis has no real grounds for continuing the investigation at this point, because it doesn't look like Coco was the one who made that spell, so he agrees to leave. But he says he will be opening a formal investigation into what happened here today, so it isn't over yet. Once Aesthis and the other knights are gone, Quaifrey breathes a sigh of relief because it's always a hassle dealing with guys like him. He apologizes to the girls because this only happened because he left them alone, but at the same time, he tells Agat and Coco that they should realize that what they did was really dangerous. If anyone had seen them use magic and learned of the secrets of magic, then they would have had to erase that person's memory, and once you erase one dude's memories, you have to erase the memories of everyone else present, and that's a whole mess waiting to happen. Both Coco and Agat apologize and assure Quaifrey that they will be more careful in the future, and Agat has already come to terms with the fact that she likely won't be allowed to take the advancement test anytime soon after this, but to her surprise, Quaifrey actually tells her that he's going to arrange the test for her once they get home. He sees it as a fitting reward since she did manage to make it through the situation without revealing magic to any of the civilians, and Tetya is a bit jealous that only Agat gets to take the test, but Quaifrey reminds her that she hasn't even completed the basics of hidden casting yet, so she's not as qualified as Agat is, and the same goes for Richa and Coco, who didn't even know that there was a second test. Olorgio asks Quaifrey if he's sure about it since earlier today, he was talking about how Agat has a tendency to get ahead of herself, and that was indeed the case before, but Agat didn't do that today. She let Coco handle it instead, and that's proof that she is ready. Agat then runs up to Quaifrey and asks him if they can leave right away so she can get home and start practicing for her test as soon as possible, but Quaifrey says there's something they should do before they leave. Meanwhile, as the knights are flying away, one of them mentions that if it's really true that Quaifrey accepted an outsider as his disciple, then the rumors that she used a forbidden spell may be true as well. However, Aesthis says they have no real proof that Coco was linked to that spell, or that she even lived there for that matter, and there's no way they'd be able to look for proof with that petrification spell encasing the entire house, so the only way they'll be able to punish her for that incident is if they can get her to admit to it on her own. After all, if the brimmed caps really have gotten to her, then it is his duty to make sure that she isn't able to cause any damage that can't be fixed. Meanwhile, back at what's left of the river, Quaifrey and the others are watching Olorgio work on building a bridge out of the sand by carving a spell into the rock, and shortly after he is done, the water from the river begins to return, meaning the effects of the spell must have worn off, so there shouldn't be any more trouble. Just then, he happens to notice Coco's bottle and hat buried in the sand, so he picks them up and hands them back over to Coco, reminding her that she should be careful not to lose her witch stuff because it would be a disaster if it ended up in the hands of a civilian. Coco thanks him for finding it for her, but when she takes a look at her ink, she realizes that it still looks like it's pretty much full, even though she has been using it since she started learning magic. She assumes the jar must have some kind of magic in it that refills it over time, but Quaifrey knows there should be no such spell on that thing, so he asks her to hand the jar to him because there's clearly something wrong with it. It turns out that at some point, the brimmed cap managed to pour some of his blood into the ink bottle, and that probably changed the ink's effects, but Quaifrey has no way of knowing that blood was added to the ink, so he decides to take it to Nolno and have it analyzed. He makes up an excuse and tells the others that he's going to stop by at Kalhan since they never really got a chance to get Coco a wand. Olorgio is a little suspicious, but before he could question Kifri about the real reason for the trip, Kifri offers to pick up 2 bottles of wine for him, and Olorgio agrees to let him go after that. A little while later, Coco and Kifri arrive at Nolnoa's shop in Calm, but to Coco's surprise, there isn't a door here anymore. She wonders if they may have gotten the address wrong or something, but Kifri says Nolnoa must just be closed for today. That said, there's no way for them to get in if the shop is closed, but fortunately for them, Tarda happened to be returning from an errand at the time. Kifri explains that he came to see Nolnoa, so Tarda agrees to let them in and reaches into his bag to pull out a magic doorknob. When the doorknob is placed against the wall, it creates a door leading into the shop, and after entering, he informs Kifri that Nolnoa should be at the top floor right now. Kifri begins heading up, and Coco is about to follow him, but Tarda stops her and points out that she's got a cut on her leg, and if she doesn't get it treated soon, it may get infected, so he asks her to come with him so he can take care of it. Coco thanks him for the offer before following him into his room, and she is amazed by all the unfamiliar items here. She picks up a jar of blue powder and asks Tarda what it is because she thinks it's pretty, and he explains that those are magic dyes that change the effects of magic when added to ink, but he asks her not to touch anything so she doesn't accidentally mix up the jars. Meanwhile, upstairs, Kifri finds Nolnoa in the middle of working on analyzing the ink from that tile's spell, but he hasn't had much luck with it because the ink used with this is unlike anything he has ever seen before. He asks Shufri if he managed to find any clues related to it, and as a matter of fact, that's exactly why Shufri came. So he hands Nolnoa the jar of ink he got from Coco, and after getting one look at it, Nolnoa immediately realizes that this is the same kind of ink that was used on the tiles. He can tell by the distinct blue hue the ink has, and he asks Shufri where he got it, but then he realizes that this is one of his own bottles of ink, and that has him confused. Kifri believes that the ink must have been tampered with when Coco was left alone back in that trap, and he wants to confirm his theory, so he takes the ink and prepares to use it to draw a basic light spell. Meanwhile, downstairs, Tarda is busy bandaging Coco's leg while she asks him about all the different magic dyes he has in here. He patiently answers all her questions about the dyes, ranging from making spells last longer to making the ink invisible, and Coco is amazed that Tarda was able to memorize all these. She says she'd love to live in a magic stationer's shop like he does, but Tarda doesn't understand why she would say something like that because being a witch apprentice at an atelier is 100 times better than being stuck here. Coco is a bit confused since she thought Tarda was a witch apprentice as well, but that's a bit of a touchy subject for him since he hasn't been able to fulfill his dream. Just then, Coco spots a really pretty red powder up on the top shelf, so she asks Tarda what it is, so he asks her to point at it so he can find it. Coco finds it a little strange that he can't spot the bright red jar, but she gets on a ladder nearby to point at it properly. However, as she is doing so, all of a sudden, Kifri's light spell activates, and it's way bigger than normal, so it startles the kids, and Coco ends up falling over. They both wonder what could have made such a blinding light, but more importantly, Coco realizes that she accidentally knocked over all the dyes. Fortunately, none of them broke, so she offers to help Tarda put them all back in place, but Tarda looks devastated and says it's pointless. All the labels of the jars fell off, and he has no idea how to tell them apart otherwise because he can't differentiate them by color like Nolnoa can. Coco feels terrible about what happened and asks if he's sure there's nothing she can do, but Tarda solemnly just asks her to leave it as it is because there are some things he simply can't do, and with his silver-washed eyes, he will never be able to become a proper witch like others. Meanwhile, back upstairs, Kifri and Nolnoa are still reeling from the effects of the magic light blast, and it makes no sense for such a small spell to create such a powerful blast, so there must be something very wrong with that ink. Kifri believes that the brimmed caps must have used a twin bottle spell, which basically means they linked Coco's bottle to one of their own, and that's how they managed to add whatever mystery additive that made the spell so powerful. Nolnoa thinks this is way too much for him to handle, so he thinks they should contact the Great Hall at once, but Kifri tells him they can't do that. This is the link to the brimmed caps he has been waiting for, and if he's going to catch them, then he needs to make sure no one knows he has this. Nolnoa is starting to get nervous because Kifri is sounding a little unhinged, and Kifri apologizes to him for what he's about to do. Later on, Kifri leaves the store and finds Coco waiting outside. She asks him to tell her what silver-washed means, so he explains that it's a congenital disease that makes it so you can only see in black and white, and since witches tend to favor good eyesight, it is rather difficult to become a witch with that sickness. Back inside, Tarda comes back into the magic dye room after a while and finds Nolnoa sorting through the mess, so he apologizes and explains that he got startled by the flash of light earlier and knocked them over by accident, But Nolno has no idea what he's talking about because he doesn't remember anything about a flash of light at all. As far as Nolno is concerned, nothing strange happened here at all. So he carries on with business as usual. But Tarta knows there's no way he didn't see that blinding flash of light. And it's pretty strange that all that happened right as Quifri left the other day, so Tarta is starting to wonder if he might have had something to do with it. Meanwhile, Quifri is out having a jolly old time with Coco and the others in a field, and Coco is apologizing non-stop because she just accidentally hit Quifri in the head with a tree branch. She was trying to make a wind spell to shake some fruit out of a tree, but her first attempt wasn't strong enough, so she tried making the spell bigger, but she overcorrected, and ended up blowing the entire branch off the tree and onto Quifri. Tetcha suggests that Coco could try changing the angle of the wind so it twists the fruit out of the tree instead of just pushing on it, and Quifri thinks that is a wonderful idea, adding that making changes to spells to fit the specific situation is what being a witch is all about. Tetcha says that it's important to think about the reason your spell failed in the first place, and even if it succeeded, you need to think about why it succeeded too, and Quifri completely agrees with her assessment. He even tells Tetia that she would make a great teacher, and Tetia loves the praise, but then Agat tells her that she's in no position to be teaching anyone when she hasn't improved much herself. A little while later, they are all sitting down together while enjoying the fruit, and Akoko asks Quifri about those tests she heard about earlier. Apparently, there are even more after the one she took at the Darter range, so she wants to know what the other tests are. Richa absolutely hates all the tests because she doesn't think they matter at all. But Quifri says the tests are designed to make sure a witch is capable of handling themselves in various real-world situations, though whether the tests are helpful or not really depends on you as a person. He explains that there are 5 tests in total, with the one at the Darter range being the first. That test was the test for permission to become an apprentice, and after that comes the test to be allowed to accompany your master out on missions. The third test allows you to enter the Tower of Tomes once passed, and by the time the 4th test is completed, you are considered a full-fledged witch with no further tutelage needed. The 5th test is one taken in order to be allowed to take on disciples of your own, but Quifri tells them that there's no need to think about that one until they've graduated first. Tetia says she's excited to become a full-fledged witch because then she'll be able to travel all across the world, helping people and being thanked for the good deeds she does. And on top of that, she'll be allowed to design her own witch hat once she officially graduates, and she plans to make it with 2 points to match her pigtails. Richa, on the other hand, absolutely detests the idea of taking tests at all, because she hates having to draw spells she doesn't want to draw. Agat reminds her that if she only draws spells that she wants to, then she will never be able to learn anything new. But Richa doesn't care about that because if advancing means she has to do things she doesn't want to, then she'd rather not. She then goes back inside, and after she's gone, Agat says that Rich may be fine with not advancing. But she is prepared to take all the tests necessary to move up because there are too many things beyond her reach right now. She wants to finish all the tests as quickly as possible, and once that's done, she plans to become a librarian in the tower. Coco is a bit surprised by Agat's wish, so Tetia explains to her that Agat comes from a prominent family of witches descended from one of the apprentices of the 3 great wise ones, and the head of the Arklum family always becomes a librarian due to tradition, which is likely why Agat wants to become one. Tetia then asks Coco what she would like to become, but Coco's journey is quite a bit different from the rest of theirs, and she doesn't really have any aspirations aside from undoing her mistake, so for now, she says she's just going to focus on learning more spells. Later on, Coco finds herself in a dark, empty space, and she is frightened because she doesn't recall how she got here. But then she sees her mother standing in the distance, and she is overcome with grief, so she runs over and starts apologizing for what happened. But right before her eyes, her mother's body turns to crystals and starts cursing Coco for doing this to her. And every doubt Coco has had about herself, becoming a witch, begins to resurface and taunt her, all until she comes face to face with Ingwen, who tells her that this is what her love of magic has led to, and it is all her fault. Coco then jolts awake in her bed and realizes that it was all a nightmare, but it still left her pretty shaken up, so she can't go back to sleep now. Meanwhile, Chifri is walking through the house with ink he got from Coco, and he's about to begin investigating it, but just then, Agat comes up the stairs, and Quifri reacts quickly, so she doesn't see the ink and gets suspicious. He then asks her what she's doing up so late, and Agat explains that she wanted to get a little more practice in before heading to bed. Quifri commends her on her good work ethic, but he reminds her that all things must be done in moderation, so she should get some rest, and Agat understands, so she agrees to go to bed. As she walks into her room, she notices Coco at her work table, and she is surprised to find her awake at this time of night. Coco says she was just having some trouble sleeping, and Agat doesn't pry any more than that, But she does notice that Coco has been practicing her spells a lot, and right now, the only thought going through Coco's head is her wondering how many spells she has to learn before she can save her mother. Back to Kaifri. He uses a spell to surround himself with a brick wall so no one sneaks up on him again. And once he's sure that he has some privacy, he starts taking a look at the ink bottle. He recalls the story of when the three wise ones initially forbade the casting of spells upon the body. The righteous witches of healing craft who used their magic to heal were opposed because a rule like that would prevent them from helping people. They fought the three wise ones to the bitter end over it, and eventually, when their memories were erased, their twin bottle spell was lost forever. The twin bottle spell was particularly useful because it allowed the contents of two separate bottles to be shared, no matter where they were in the world, and it made it easy to access all sorts of medicine to help the sick, but no one has been able to replicate that spell since, apparently with the exception of the brimmed caps. Kaifri hates the idea of ruining such an elegant spell, but he has to dissect it if he wants to track the brimmed caps down. He doesn't plan to do anything with the ink yet because using that when he doesn't know what's in it would be way too risky, so instead, he decides to go after the metal piece with the casting seal inscribed on it. That casting seal is tied to whoever drew the spell, so if Kaifri can just place it in a guidance orb, it will lead him right to the brimmed caps. He carefully reaches into the jar and grabs the casting seal with a pair of tweezers, but just as the seal is about to leave the jar, a failsafe Ingwen created activates, creating a large blast of lightning. Kaifri uses the rock spell to shield himself from the lightning blast, but he also accidentally knocks the bottle away in the process, which activated the second part of the failsafe, creating a powerful water vortex that sucks Kaifri up. As he is getting tossed around in the vortex, Kaifri realizes that he messed up because he was so excited that he didn't think of the potential dangers, and he can't draw any spells in water, so he is completely defenseless. To make matters worse, the bottle releases yet another bolt of lightning, shocking Kaifri in the water, and by the time the spell ends, Kaifri is left gasping for air with his entire body numb from the shock. And as if he wasn't already humiliated enough, he looks up to see Ingwen, who had just teleported here, floating over him as he rides around on the ground. He tries to get up and fight, but his body is still much too numb for him to move, so Ingwen casually reaches for the bottle and crushes it in his hand while Kaifri is forced to watch. He desperately tries to grab Ingwen because he refuses to give up until he has reclaimed what the brimmed caps have stolen from him. But before he could do anything, Ingwen had already vanished into thin air, along with all of Kaifri's hope of tracking him down. Ingwen reappears on a beach, and he is disappointed that the gift he put so much effort into giving Coco was discovered so quickly, but there's nothing he can do about it now. So he teleports away to prepare for his next plan. The next morning, both Kaifri and Coco have been yawning non-stop, and the others are starting to notice, so they ask if the two of them stayed up late for some reason. Coco admits that she may have been up later than usual last night, but Agat points out that it wasn't just last night. Coco has been staying up late to practice every night for the last few days, and the others are worried when they hear this, because as old Rugio always says, if you don't get proper sleep while you're young, you're going to be short as hell for the rest of your life. Tedia offers to brew some herbal tea for Coco to help her get to sleep, and she asks Kaifri if he would like some as well, but he looks like he's already down for the count. The others wake him up, and Kaifri apologizes for dozing off all of a sudden. He tells Tedia she can let him handle making the tea, but as he grabs the pot, his hand slips and he ends up pouring hot water on himself and dropping the kettle as a result of the pain. The others ask Kaifri if he's alright, and Kaifri realizes that he wasn't able to hold the kettle properly because his hand is still numb from the lightning last night. But he can't let the girls find out about that, so he tells them everything is fine and that he will clean up the mess later, but right now he is going to go pick some herbs so he can brew a new pot of tea. The girls can tell that Kaifri is acting really strange today, but they just assume that his clumsiness is due to sleep deprivation and leave it at that. While Kaifri is gone, Coco asks Agat if she can come with her for a minute, because there's something she'd like to talk to her about, and Agat goes along with her. So Coco leads her upstairs and presents her with the sylph shoes she fixed, and she apologizes for taking so long to fix them, but she wanted to make sure the flight magic was balanced properly. Agat is surprised that Coco is giving these back to her, and she believes Coco must be plotting something because there's no way she can be this nice. Coco doesn't understand what Agat is talking about, so Agat reminds her that even when Kaifri was scolding her for taking the test without his permission, she didn't snitch on Agat even though she was the one who forced her to do it, despite the fact that she had every opportunity to do so. And now, she fixed Agat's shoes without being asked to, so she doesn't understand what Coco hopes to gain by doing this. Coco admits that Agat is right, she could have snitched on her for forcing her to take the test, and at first, that's what she wanted to do. When she first got to the test site, she was alone and scared with no way back, so she contemplated just staying out and waiting for Qifrey to come get her. But she decided to actually try because she wanted to prove to herself that she was capable of overcoming problems with her magic. Agathe doesn't know how to take all this because she has been feeling incredibly guilty about what she did to Coco. But before she could offer an actual apology, Coco suddenly falls to the ground with a massive fever. Qifrey is out in the garden, eating some medicinal herbs to help with his numbness when all of a sudden, Agathe comes flying up and knocks him off his feet. Qifrey is startled, but he does manage to regain his balance, and once he and Agathe are safe, he asks her why she was going so fast. Agathe explains that Coco must have made the flight spell too strong, but that's not what's important right now because Coco needs their help. Qifrey and Agathe rush back to the atelier, and Coco's fever has only gotten worse, so Qifrey plans to take her to a hospital in Kaln and asks Olrugio to watch over the atelier while he's gone. When Qifrey arrives in Kaln, he ends up bumping into Tarda, and he asks if he can lead him to the hospital because Coco needs immediate medical attention, and he isn't familiar with this area. Tarda agrees to help Qifrey get to the hospital and says he knows a shortcut, so he proceeds to lead him down a bunch of alleyways until they finally arrive at the clinic. Qifrey then hands Coco over to the doctor, and he thanks Tarda for what he did back there. Tarda says he didn't do anything special, but on the contrary, Qifrey says Tarda must be very observant to have found a shortcut like that. Hearing that from Qifrey is high praise, so Tarda is grateful, and while he has Qifrey here, he decides to ask a question that has been bothering him for a while now. Qifrey looks at Tarda with cold indifference for a second, but then he quickly switches to his bubbly personality because he assumes Tarda wants to ask him a question about magic, and he absolutely loves explaining magic to people. After seeing how excited Qifrey got, Tarda is a little hesitant to tell him that he wasn't going to ask about magic, but just then, the nurse comes out and tells both Qifrey and Tarda that they can come in to see Coco now. Thankfully, after the nurse takes a look at her, she tells them that her condition isn't that serious since it's just an exhaustion-induced fever. And she also noticed that Coco seems a bit sleep-deprived, so she tells Qifrey that as long as she gets some proper rest, she should be better in a few days. Though, just to be safe, the nurse thinks it would be best if Coco spends the night here. Qifrey thanks her for her help, and the nurse says she can't say she knows what kind of training witches have to go through. But it's an adult's duty to make sure kids don't overwork themselves, so she's basically telling Qifrey this is his fault. Qifrey realizes the nurse is right, so he apologizes to Coco, and in order to make her stay here at least a little more comfortable, he draws a quick spell to use water to cool the room down and help manage Coco's fever. Tarda wonders why Coco would work herself to the point of collapse like that, but Qifrey tells him that while Coco may look all cheerful on the surface, she didn't know anything about magic until recently, so she must be extremely desperate to catch up to her peers, to the point where she unknowingly neglected her well-being. Tarda had heard rumors about an outsider who recently joined the world of magic, but he never could have guessed that it was Coco. Qifrey also apologizes to Tarda since earlier he said he had a question he wanted to ask, but he says they are going to have to table whatever discussion he wanted to have for another date because now isn't really a good time for him. Tarda completely understands and tells Qifrey there's no need for him to worry about it, and just then, the evening bell rings, so Tarda tells Qifrey that it's time for him to head home. But as he is leaving, we see that he accidentally forgot his hat on the floor. Unfortunately for Tarda, this is a huge problem for him because the ferry into the heart of the city is only accessible to witches, so the guards won't let him on unless he can prove that he is a witch by showing his hat the same hat which he no longer has. So if he wants to get home, he is forced to turn back and go look for it. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, Qifrey is still sitting by Coco's bedside as the doctor comes back to take a look at her. And he tells Qifrey that the mist spell he used is really wonderful because it makes the room nice and cool. But Qifrey says it's nothing compared to what doctors like him do because, despite all the magic Qifrey can use, he can't cure diseases, so he can't help Coco himself no matter how badly he wants to. Even so, the doctor still tells him that his magic is helping keep Coco's fever under control, so it is very helpful. Meanwhile, on the northern side of town, a bar has just gone up in flames, so someone comes rushing over to fetch the doctor because they need to treat the burn victims. But when he arrives, he notices the magic bubbles floating in the air next to Qifrey, and when he realizes that Qifrey is a witch, he begs him to come help put out the fire because there are still many people trapped inside. Qifrey would like to help, but he is a little hesitant to leave Coco all alone here. However, Coco had regained consciousness by this point and she heard the whole thing, so she tells Qifrey she will be fine by herself, and there's no need for him to worry about her. Since Coco is so insistent, Qifrey agrees to head out with the others to go stop the fire, and as the people are leaving, Tarda finally returns to the clinic looking for his hat. He has checked everywhere else in town already, so he's sure it has to be here. And sure enough, as he walks back into Coco's room, he sees it on the floor. He goes to pick it up, but all of a sudden, he hears Coco moaning and groaning in her sleep, so he goes over to check on her. When Coco wakes up, she is surprised to see Tarda and asks what he's doing here, but then she starts coughing mid-sentence because she's still feeling pretty sick. Tarda can tell that Coco's cold has gotten worse, so he wants to call someone for help, but there's no one else in the clinic right now, which he thinks is weird. Coco explains that everyone went to deal with the fire up north, including Kufri, so they are the only ones here right now. It would take forever for Tarda to go find someone to help, and Coco needs help right now, so he decides to do what he can for her. He recalls that Trancalif is good for bringing down fevers, and the doctor must have some around here somewhere, so he starts looking through the cabinets to find where the medicine is stored. He eventually manages to find the tray of medicine, but to his horror, none of the jars here are labeled, which seems a little irresponsible on the doctor's part. But more importantly, without any labels, Tarda isn't able to tell the herbs apart since he can't see their colors. He is completely helpless in a situation like this, and this brings back painful memories of his past, where he was looked down upon by the adults because of his silver-wash eyes. They told him that without being able to see colors, he would never be able to draw more complex spells with magic dyes, so it wouldn't be worth it to train him as a witch, and he should just accept that there are some things he will never be able to do. The worst part of all this is that Tarda actually knows this stuff. The components in magic dyes are often used as medicines, so he knows what all the plants and herbs look like and what they can do, but when they are ground up, the only way to tell them apart is by their color. Coco can see that Tarda is upset, so she tugs on his shirt to ask if everything is okay, and Tarda apologizes for not being able to help Coco with the medicine. However, he still wants to make her as comfortable as possible, so when she starts coughing again, he reaches into his bag and pulls out a vapor bubble to give her some water. But as he is doing so, he recalls that the vapor bubble works by drawing moisture out of its surroundings, and that gives him an idea. The Trancalif is dried up and ground into a powder before being stored, so if Tarda uses the vapor bubble to extract all the excess water from the medicines, then he will be able to distinguish them by their physical state. Tarda goes ahead with his plan, and using this method, he is able to rule out a few medicines, like the one that's crystalline and the oil-based one, but even after eliminating most of them, he is still left with 3 powders that look almost identical to him, and he has no idea what to do from here. Trying to guess would be way too risky, and Tarda feels like an absolute failure because in the end, there really isn't anything he can do. He gives up on trying to figure out the medicine and decides to just try wiping down Coco's sweat, since this is all he is good for right now. But Coco tells him not to think like that because if you want to do something you otherwise can't do, that's where magic comes in. She asks Tarda if he happens to have some ink and a pen with him, and as a matter of fact, Tarda does have a pen he recently carved, so he hands it over to Coco, and she begins drawing with it. She is doing her best to stay focused, but she is still very cold, so Tarda takes a blanket and wraps it around Coco to keep her warm. He then asks her what kind of spell she is drawing, assuming it's something that will help her feel better, but Coco says she doesn't know any spells like that, so instead, she's drawing a spell that will help Tarda. Hearing her say that surprises Tarda, so now he is even more curious about what the spell does, and Coco explains that she just made some modifications to the rock-breaking spell she knows. Normally, the spell turns solid objects into powders, but she switched the symbols around, so now it should turn powders back into their solid forms. This way, she believes it should be easier for Tarda to identify the ingredients since he knows what the original forms look like, but when she tries to demonstrate by activating the spell, the form looks all blobby and unrecognizable, and it makes Coco feel like a failure because she couldn't draw it right. All the lines on it are wobbly and uneven, and that may be in part due to the fact that she's sick, but it doesn't change the fact that her spell failed because of her. Tarda asks her if that means the spell would work if the lines were drawn more precisely because, if so, he thinks he can help. And Coco says she'd appreciate that. She watches Tarda analyze the spell, and it reminds her of how cool he looked when she first saw him carving pens in Nulnoa's store. But just then, Tarda snaps her out of it and asks if he can move the symbols on the top and bottom to the sides because he thinks it would make the spell more balanced and help the powder maintain a more defined form. Coco tells him he is free to make whatever changes he feels are necessary because if he's the one drawing it, then it's his spell. Once Tarda has decided on all the details, he begins drawing, and a few minutes later, the spell is complete, so Tarda decides to test it out. Sure enough, when he places a jar over it, the spell makes the powder take the shape of the plant it originally came from, so it was a complete success. And Tarda is happier than ever because this is the first time he has accomplished something like this. He immediately gets to work trying to find the Tranquilife again, but to his surprise, none of the vials here actually contain Tranquilife, so it's a good thing he didn't guess earlier. He is sure there must be some around here, so he says he's going to go down into the storage room to look for the Tranquilife there. Normally, Tarda would never be able to tell all these different medicines apart, but thanks to the spell he and Coco made, he can clearly distinguish between them. So it feels like a limit that has been weighing him down all his life has just been broken. He eventually manages to find the Tranquilife, but all of a sudden, the nurse walks into the storage room and asks Tarda what he's doing, rummaging through the clinic's medicine. He explains the whole situation to her, and the nurse understands that he just wanted to help Coco and thought there was no one else around, but there's no way anyone would be careless enough to leave a hospital completely abandoned when they have a patient. She also tells him that the reason there aren't any labels on the medicine is to prevent people from trying to administer treatment by themselves, since giving a sick person the wrong medicine can be very dangerous. Though she does admit that, in this case, Tarda was completely correct about Tranquilife being the right choice, so she asks him if he happens to have an interest in medicine by chance, but then she notices his hat and realizes he must be a witch's apprentice. By the morning, Quaifree finally returns, and he has been worried about Coco all night, but he is relieved to see her sleeping peacefully with Tarda by her side. Later on, Coco wakes up, and she is feeling much better now thanks to the medicine, so she thanks Tarda for helping her last night, but Tarda tells her she's actually the one who helped him. Later on, Nolnoa comes looking for Tarda since he didn't come home last night, and he is relieved to see that he is okay. But now that both Nolnoa and Quaifree are here, Tarda thinks it's the perfect time to ask them about the light he saw the other day. However, Nolnoa still has no memory of it, and Quaifree just plays dumb and pretends he doesn't know what Tarda is talking about, successfully gaslighting him into thinking he might have imagined it. After that, Tarda and Nolnoa get on the ferry to return home, and after Coco says goodbye to him, Tarda yells back, telling her that he's going to make his best magic pen for her as a thank you gift, and Coco tells him she can't wait to see it. After that, Quaifree and Coco begin their journey home as well, and along the way, Coco explains to Quaifree that the reason she has been having trouble sleeping is because she has been having nightmares. Quaifree doesn't really know how to help Coco with that since sleep spells are considered forbidden, but Coco says there's no need for him to worry because she doesn't think she will have nightmares anymore. After all, she has found her ray of hope. The spell she made last night reminded her that spells are easily reversible as long as you flip the signs around, so as long as she can find the spell from the picture book that crystallized her mother, she can undo it and save her. At the same time, the Brimcaps are preparing for their next encounter with Coco, and they plan to strike the next time she undergoes a test because she will be outside Quaifree's protection during that time. The next day, everything goes back to normal, and Coco's magic lessons with Quaifree continue. After a little practice, she is finally able to reliably cast the light spell without needing any references. Quaifree congratulates her on her success, and Coco is happy, but she knows she's still got a lot of work ahead of her because she still has trouble with the more complicated spells, and if she doesn't get the hang of them, she will end up defaulting back to the basic ones she knows all the time. Quaifree tells her that there's nothing wrong with using the same spells often because spells you are able to draw reliably with very little effort can be considered a specialty. Coco is intrigued when she hears Quaifree mention this, so Quaifree goes on to tell her that he noticed that when Coco draws, she draws her straight lines with a lot more confidence than she does her curves, and he remembers seeing Coco draw some wonderfully straight lines, so he tells her that straight lines could be considered Coco's specialty. Coco is thrilled to hear that she has a specialty, so she decides to get to work practicing her straight lines some more, but Quaifree tells her to wait because she doesn't need to do that. She will naturally master things that she's already good at, so it's the things that she struggles with that deserve more attention as far as practice goes. Which is why Quaifree dumps a large stack of books in front of Coco and tells her to start reading. Coco begins studying all kinds of magic circles, and each one is even more impressive to her than the last. She always loved magic circles even as a kid when she knew nothing about magic, but it's a whole different story now that she understands what the magic actually does, and it gives her a whole new respect for how much effort must have gone into designing them. She asks Riche if she would like to take a look at these spells with her because they are all so amazing, but Riche flatly refuses because she says she isn't interested in other people's spells. Coco asks her if she's sure, since these spells really are impressive, but Riche gets mad at Coco's insistence and accidentally completes a crystal spell she was working on, crystallizing the table in the process. Quaifree rushes over to check on Riche to see if she's okay, and thankfully, she wasn't hurt by the accident, but he tells her that she really should be careful not to cast spells while angry. Riche doesn't take the criticism very well and pulls her hand away from Quaifree before running off to her room, and Coco feels like this was somehow her fault, so she chases after her to apologize. Meanwhile, Chifrey is left wondering how to handle Rich's stubborn outbursts, and that's when Olrugio, who had been napping on the couch when all this happened, tells him that if Riche continues to ignore the milestones of learning and Quaifrey's instructions, then she will never grow as a witch. Coco follows Richie into her room, but to her surprise, when she enters, Richie is nowhere to be found. She starts wondering where she could possibly have gone, but then she notices the brush buddy on the ground, and she asks it if it knows where Riche went, to which it responds by scampering into a nearby scroll pot. Coco gets worried and tries to pull the brush buddy out to safety, but to her surprise, she finds out that there's actually a secret compartment under the pot. So she heads down and finds a grass-filled tunnel, which eventually leads to a little room Rich made. Coco is amazed by how pretty this place is, but Rich turns around and tells her she was never given permission to enter, so she shouldn't be here. Coco apologizes and says she was just following the brush buddy, so she didn't mean to intrude, but she really does mean it when she says she thinks this place is pretty. Especially all the crystal ribbons Riche has hung up all over the ceiling. She asks if they were made using a spell, and Riche confirms this, explaining that it's an original spell she created, but she hasn't come up with a name for it yet. Coco thinks it's amazing that Riche was able to come up with an original spell, and seeing how much Coco really seems to like the crystal ribbons, Riche tells her she can take one of them if she wants, which Coco is really happy to hear. She thanks Rich for her kindness, but while she's here anyway, she also wants to ask why Riche doesn't like looking at other people's spells. Coco really enjoys it because there's so much she doesn't understand about magic, and when she sees a new spell, she has fun imagining what led to the creation of that spell and what the creator was thinking at the time, so she doesn't understand why Riche would be so averse to it. Riche explains that she doesn't like looking at other people's spells because if she looks at them, then she's going to be asked to draw spells she doesn't want to, and she is sick and tired of being forced to do that, so she refuses to let other people's spells contaminate hers. Meanwhile, back in the study, Quaifrey is still cleaning up the mess from the spell earlier, and he explains to Olrugio that Richie isn't incapable of learning, she just uses her stubbornness as a shield to protect herself, and Quaifrey honestly isn't sure how much he should interfere since he knows her situation is rather complicated. Olrugio says he's glad he isn't the one who has to deal with this, but he does have a little gift for Quaifrey, so he tosses him a bag. He had heard that Quaifrey and Coco hadn't been getting proper sleep lately, so he invented a new magic device to help them sleep. Sleep magic is technically forbidden, so he did the next best thing and made these stones, which will keep you all warm and comfy at night if you put them under your pillow. So they should help everyone get to sleep easier, if only a little. After Olrugio leaves, Quaifrey notices that a letter just came through on the magic printer, so he goes over to take a look. And a few moments later, Agat happens to walk in, which is perfect timing, because the letter Quaifrey just received was one informing him that a date has officially been set for Agat's test. In Rich's childhood, she used to work on her spells while hiding in little tunnels all the time, but whenever her brother Riley would come over to see what she was up to, she'd get embarrassed and try to hide it. Riley hugged Richa and told her that she didn't need to hide it because he loves seeing her spells, and he tells her to never change who she is for any reason. Richie really cared about her brother, but for some reason, he never came to see her again after that. On the day of Agat's test, everyone arrives at the test site bright and early, but Agat is upset because she ended up sleeping through the entire ride here, even though she wanted to use the time to practice a little more, and it's all because Olrugio's snugstones worked a little too well on her. Quaifrey tells Agat that there's no need for her to worry because it's normal to feel like you haven't prepared enough on the day of an exam, but as long as she remembers the basics, she should be fine. And even if she doesn't pass this time, she can always just try again next year. Agat thanks Quaifrey for the kind words, but she tells him there's no need because she's going to pass the test on the first try, so there won't be a next time. After all, she is a member of the House of Arklam. A moment later, another instructor walks over with his apprentice and says he likes Agat's confidence. It's the exact opposite of his apprentice, Uini, who has no confidence in himself and has already failed this test twice. He says he'd love to trade this failure for a daughter from the House of Arklam any day, but Quaifrey yells at him for talking as though apprentices are nothing more than objects to be traded at will. Kirkau retorts that Quaifrey is only saying that because he hasn't had to deal with a failure like Uini before, and Quaifrey is about to say something again, but Uini stops him and says there's no need to defend him because everything Kirkau said about him just now is true. He even starts apologizing to Kirkau for his incompetence, and Quaifrey is starting to understand where Uini's lack of confidence comes from, so he feels really bad for him. A few moments later, Quaifrey hears a familiar voice approaching, and when Coco turns around, she is shocked to see a giant brush buddy standing behind her, but Koifri tells her it's not actually a brush buddy, it's a witch. Coco is a little confused by this since she's sure that transformation magic counts as forbidden, but Alara didn't actually use any transformation magic. She was just wearing a cloak that creates an illusion of any nearby beasts, which is why she looked like a brush buddy just now. Anyway, Alara is the proctor who has been assigned to oversee today's test, and the test is named Sincerity of the Shield. As the name implies, the goal of this test is for the candidates to act as a shield, defending their target until they make it all the way through Serpentback Cave. They must not lose sight of their target during that time, and if they end up reaching the end of the cave alone, then they will be disqualified, and of course, they can't let themselves be seen while casting a spell. Agate asks what will happen if she is spotted, and Alara explains that it will be an instant fail because she'll be outing herself as a human. The others don't really understand what she means by that, so she tells them to put on the illusion cloaks and follow her. She leads them to the edge of a cliff, where they find several merfans, and they are the targets that the test takers will need to defend. The cave is actually an old magical ruin, and it is protected by all sorts of magic spells, so it is dangerous to stray from the path, which is why they need to use magic to guide and protect the merfans they will be put in charge of. With these cloaks, the merfans will see them as one of their own, so they won't be startled, but if they take off the cloak or break the seal in any way, the merfans will realize that they're human and run away. Agate realizes that this might actually be harder than she thought, but she has come too far to turn back now. Alara begins handing out the merfans, and after giving Agate hers, she then walks over to Richa to hand her one as well. Richa is confused and tries to explain to Alara that she isn't taking the test with Agate, but Alara says she clearly remembers receiving a test application with Richa's name on it. Koifri then steps up to explain that he was actually the one who sent the application in for Richa, and when Richa learns of this, she feels absolutely betrayed. She says Koifri lied to her because the only reason she agreed to come to his atelier in the first place was because Koifri told her she wouldn't have to do things she didn't want to do, yet now he's forcing her to take this test. So she figures he must not care about what she wants like all the other adults. Koifri assures Richa that he does care about what she wants, and that's exactly why he wants her to take this test, because if she truly wants to live her life the way she wants, then she will need to be able to overcome various challenges, and this will help her learn to do that. He asks her to just trust him on this for today, and seeing how sincere Koifri is, Richa agrees to do it for him, but she says that if she tries it and hates it, then she's never going to take another test again. Koifri breathes a sigh of relief because he is glad he finally got Richa to agree, and Alara says she can see that he's got his hands quite full. But then Kurkau comes in completely uninvited and starts talking about how useless Richa seems and how Koifri would be better off just ditching her. Koifri has had just about enough of his useless chatter, so he gives Kurkau a side eye that tells him he's dangerously close to finding out what laws Koifri is willing to break for his students, and Kurkau is absolutely terrified, so he decides to dip, practically leaving his apprentice to fend for himself and showing that Kurkau really doesn't give a damn about Uini. Koifri goes over to Uini to see if he's okay because something like that probably hurt his confidence, but Uini says he's fine and that he will still try his best on the test. As the test begins, Alara leads the candidates into the cave, and while they are busy with the test, Koifri suggests he, Coco, and Tedia should have a meal while he gives them a history lesson, since they probably don't know much about magical runes like these and the effects that forbidden magic from the old days have had here. And as Koifri says this, the candidates all get a first-hand lesson on what he's talking about because they find the space in the tunnel completely warped. While their meal is cooking, Koifri tells the girls a story about an ancient magic civilization known as the Romanons, who once occupied these caves and were extremely prosperous. So prosperous, in fact, that once word spread about them, many travelers came seeking to visit the Romanon city. Thus, the Romanons built the Serpent's Path to welcome those whom they deemed would be a benefit to their society, and they cast a maze spell on the path to make sure those who weren't worthy would never be able to enter their city. Like this, the city of Romanon continued to prosper and grow, but when they eventually ran out of outsiders to look down on, they turned their judgment towards each other and started discriminating. As such, those within the city who were deemed to be unworthy were captured and turned into gold to be used as decoration, and things all went downhill from there until eventually, the entire city was destroyed. Now, all that remains of the city is the Labyrinth Cave and the Serpentback Road inside. Koifri personally thinks it's terrifying what humans are capable of when power falls into the wrong hands, but he says that as long as future witches continue to believe that magic exists to help people, then tragedies like that will never happen again. After all, using magic improperly can lead to a lot of devastating outcomes. For example, while Koifri was talking, they all forgot to pay attention to their fish, so now the fire magic has accidentally burned it all. And as soon as Coco and Tetcha realize this, they immediately panic and scramble to salvage what they can of their breakfast. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Agat and the others are faced with their first challenge to overcome. Alara tells them that, as their proctor, she is not allowed to offer them any advice, so they will have to figure this out on their own. Richa thinks it's simple, since even if the road is all warped, all they need to do is fly across. But as her feet leave the path, Richa suddenly feels her sense of direction go all wonky, and no matter how hard she tries to fly straight, she keeps going in random directions. She is about to crash back onto the path, but fortunately, Yuani jumps in just in time to catch her, so Richa doesn't get hurt. Agat is surprised to see that Yuani is standing sideways on the path, so she asks him if he's using a spell to do that, but he says it's not his magic. The path itself has magic that makes the orientation in the cave unpredictable, and the only way to get through the cave is to keep your feet on the path. Otherwise, you'll end up falling for an undetermined amount of time until you end up back at the entrance. Agat assumes the tiles on the road must contain the casting seals that keep the spell going, but they are worn out in some locations, so there's a risk of getting caught in a dead zone if you're not careful where you step. Yuani confirms this since that's how he failed the test the first time he took it, and he's about to explain the trick to avoiding the traps, but Agat says she already has an idea of how to get around it. She conjures up a ball of water and drops it on the path, and since water flows with gravity, it should level out on the spots where the path spell is still active and behave weirdly where the spell is worn out. That way, they can identify the right places to step and the places to avoid. Yuani is impressed that Agat was able to figure it out on her first try, and he confirms that it was indeed the right answer. But Richa hates the way he phrased that because she thinks there's never only one right answer when it comes to magic. She recalls how, under her previous master, when she would spend time practicing her ribbon spell, he would come over and call all her hard work useless trash because it wasn't the quote-unquote right spell, and that was when Richa's resentment for people telling her what's right truly started. Back in the present, the water Agat poured earlier has been really helpful when it comes to identifying the safe path, but she has now run into a different problem because her penguin refuses to listen to her instructions. She doesn't know how to get it to follow her if it's not willing to listen, and Yuani mentions that the right answer here is to use an echoing spell to mirror the sounds the penguins make and trick them into following. But Richa cuts him off and tells him there's no such thing as a right answer when it comes to magic. As she says this, she walks by holding 3 of her crystal ribbons, and the penguins all immediately shift their attention toward the shiny ribbons and start following Richa. Yuani is shocked that Richa managed to get the penguins to follow her even though she didn't use the right spell, but Richa tells him to stop calling it the right spell because that dismisses all other methods before you've even tried them, and Richa, for one, refuses to cast spells simply because someone else said it was the right one. Yuani didn't mean to offend her, but he has been taught over and over that if you don't use the right spell and draw it the right way, then he will always fail. But Richa tells him that if a spell fails, then you just need to remake it so it doesn't fail next time. Yuani says an approach like that is far too reckless, and if he were to do something like that, then he might fail this test again. But Agat chimes in and tells him that past failures become knowledge, so even if you end up failing by deviating from what is normally done, it can still help you grow and become a better witch. That's something she learned from watching Coco these past few weeks, and as such, she tells Richa that she is free to use whatever methods she likes during the exam. As the group continues down the path, they eventually reach a section where they hear running water, and the second Yuani realizes what it is, he begins to curse his rotten luck because his master always tells him he is a total failure, and it looks like he's going to be proven right because the path is completely broken up ahead, so there's nowhere for them to go. Meanwhile, outside, Kufri and the girls are taking a walk around the cave entrance when Coco suddenly notices something weird. She asks Kufri if there are any other witches here right now because she could have sworn she just saw a witch's cloak fly by, but as far as Kufri knows, they should be the only ones here right now. Coco heads over to the cliff to check it out, but she doesn't find anything odd, so she assumes she must have just imagined it. However, underneath the cliff, we see one of the brimmed caps, who has just arrived, hiding to avoid getting spotted. Back inside the cave, it's clear that they can't just jump across the gap since the path isn't there to stabilize the space, so they are going to have to find their own way to get across. Richa steps up to the edge first, and since the path spell only maintains its effect while they are touching it, she uses one of her ribbon spells to turn a part of the path into a ribbon and wraps it around herself and her penguin before flying over to the other side. Since she is still technically touching the path, she manages to cross the gap without any trouble, and once she makes it to the other side, the ribbon she made crumbles to dust. Agat thinks Richa's idea is great, so she decides to try it herself, and by using a replication spell, She is able to create copies of the path underneath her feet to allow her to cross to the other side with her penguin. However, just before she can make it to the other side, the path she created crumbles away, and Agat nearly falls, but fortunately, she is able to grab onto the path just in time to save herself. She realizes that the reason her spell crumbled so quickly was because she messed a few of the lines up while she was trying to draw it under her cloak, so she still has a lot to learn before she gets to Qifree's level. Now, the only one left who hasn't crossed yet is Yuani, so Alara urges him to get started, but Yuani suddenly breaks down and says he can't do it. Agat thinks Yuani is just nervous, so she tells him that he has already demonstrated good analytical skills and knowledge of this test. So he should have no trouble getting past this if he just puts his experience to use and draws a spell. But that's precisely the problem, because Yuani says he can't draw any spells. He has never been able to draw spells with someone watching him because his hands always start shaking uncontrollably from nervousness, and it gets worse when the people looking at him are as judgmental as his master. However, he has no problems drawing spells when he is by himself, so since he already knew what the test entailed, he decided to pre-draw spells to solve all the problems he might face here, so he wouldn't have to draw any spells during the test. However, he never anticipated that the path would collapse, so he doesn't have a spell prepared for that, and there's no way he can get past this section of the test, and he hates himself for it. Agat hates to say it, but if Yuani really can't draw spells right now, then there's no way he will be able to continue the test. However, Richa, on the other hand, refuses to give up on him because she sees a bit of herself in him. She is sure people have been telling Yuani there is only one right way to do things all his life and that he's a failure if he can't do it in a specific way, but she tells him he should just do it whatever way he can. Earlier, he said he is able to draw spells when he is alone, so Richa tells him all he needs to do is find a way to make himself alone. Yuani asks how he's supposed to do that, and Richa tells him he can just use magic to make a wall around himself, but Yuani reminds her his hands are still shaking, so she tells him to try doing it without magic. Yuani has no idea how to do that, so to escape all the embarrassment, he ducks into his cloak and begins beating himself up about how stupid he must look right now. He assumes they must all be laughing at his failure by now and mocking him. But to his surprise, when he peeks back out, he sees that Alara doesn't look disappointed or judgmental at all. And neither do Agat or Richa, and that makes him realize that right now, the only person telling him he can't do it is himself. Just then, while he's inside the cloak, he spots the illusion spell that was cast on it, and that gives him an idea, so he begins making some modifications to it. Outside the cloak, Alara hears the sound of scribbling, but just as she's about to ask what Yuani is doing, all of a sudden, his entire body becomes engulfed in shadows. Alara panics because she thinks this might be an ancient trap that Yuani accidentally triggered, so she puts up a wind barrier and tells everyone to brace themselves. But then Yuani tells her there's no need to worry because he was the one who made the shadows. Alara is relieved that it wasn't a trap, but she asks Yuani what he did to his cloak because she can't see him anymore. He explains that he saw the illusion spell was made of an overlapping brimshade spell to hide the wearer's body and a reflection spell to create an illusion over the body. So he just erased the reflection part, and now all the cloak does is hide his body in shadows. The rules say he can't let the penguins realize that he's a human, which is why they normally need to wear the cloaks to disguise themselves as penguins. But technically, since the penguins can't see him at all now, they still haven't realized that he's a human, so he still meets the test requirements. Also, since his body is hidden in shadows, he can finally focus on drawing his spells because no one can see him, so he proceeds to draw a spell that turns a portion of the tiles into a branch, which he then proceeds to ride across the gap. On the other side, he does think it's a little embarrassing to do it this way, but he was still able to succeed by doing things his own way, so he thanks Reach for encouraging him back there. Agat is rather surprised that Richi went out of her way to help Yuani since she usually has no interest in other people, but she says Yuani saved her from falling earlier, so she was just repaying the favor. In any case, now that they've made it past that gap, they should be able to continue progressing through the cave without much trouble. So Agat creates another ball of water to clear the path and starts running ahead. Alara crosses the gap as well to catch up with the others a few moments later, and she asks Richa how she feels about this test so far. Richa admits that it's not as bad as she thought it would be, so she doesn't hate it, but she's still mad at Qifree for tricking her into taking the test, so he's going to have to apologize to her for that before she forgives him. Just then, a black figure appears behind Alara and grabs her. She immediately realizes that it's one of the brimmed caps, so she throws her hat off to send a distress signal, and before the brimmed cap drags her away, she tells the kids that if the brimmed caps try to tell them anything, they shouldn't listen because they can't let themselves be tainted by forbidden magic. Meanwhile, outside, Chifri and the others are still completely oblivious to what's going on inside the cave, and both Coco and Tetia are just having fun racing around on their sylph shoes. However, a few moments later, Alera's hat comes flying out of the cave, and the second Chifri sees it, he immediately knows something is wrong, because no witch would throw their hat away unless it was a serious emergency. He's about to get ready to head into the cave to go check on her. But all of a sudden, the serpent statue at the entrance to the cave suddenly begins moving on its own and attacks the group, causing the ground to collapse. Chifri recognizes this as a golem spell, but spells like these in the cave were all disabled ages ago. So Chifri comes to the conclusion that this must have been the work of the brimmed caps. As they are falling, Chifri grabs the girls and is about to fly back to the surface, but before he can do so, he gets hit in the back of the head by a falling rock and loses consciousness. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Agat, Riche, and Yuani are all running for their lives because the cloak-brimmed cap is chasing after them. Yuani is starting to feel really hopeless because he knows there's no way they can outrun that guy, and even if they could, there's nowhere for them to run to. But Riche yells at him to stop being so negative all the time, so Yuani locks in and grabs both Riche and Agat before pulling them under his cloak to hide from Sasarin. Thanks to the darkness modifications Yuani made to the cloak, Sasarin actually loses sight of them, so they are safe for now, and the group would have been able to hide in here indefinitely. But unfortunately, since they are now under the cloak with the penguins, the spell that was keeping the penguins from realizing that Yuani is a human is no longer in effect for them, and once they get a good look at his face, the penguins start panicking and making noise, which alerts Sasarin to their position. Yuani and the others manage to shut the birds up before Sasarin can find their exact location, but he now knows the general area they are hiding in, so he creates a suction spell, which ends up pulling Yuani's cloak off them. It nearly sucks Yuani in as well, but Rich manages to use a dust spell to distract Sasarin while Agat helps Yuani to his feet, and they all run away together before Sasarin starts chasing them again. It would be much easier to get away if they could use their sylph shoes to fly, but they can't do that because of the cave's warping spell, and there's no way they'll be able to outrun Sasarin on foot. Agat is desperately trying to think of a way to get out of this mess, but if even Alera couldn't beat Sasarin, then Agat knows she stands no chance as she is now. To make matters worse, the kids eventually come across another damaged section of the path, but seeing it gives Agat an idea. She recalls seeing Alera cross the gaps by creating a frozen path to connect both ends, so she should be able to do the same in this case. And sliding across ice is much faster than running, so it will help them get away from Sasarin as well. While Agat is busy drawing the ice spell, Richie creates a sled out of a portion of the path, and once she's done, Richie and Yuani get on while Agat uses her sylph shoes to push them across the ice path. Now they are moving much faster than before, so they should be able to stay away from Sasarin as long as they keep up this pace. While they are racing down the ice path, Agat asks Yuani to freeze a new path for them once they reach the end of the path Agat created, so he starts flipping through the pre-made spells he created. And once he finds an ice spell, he completes it to freeze the road up ahead. But even though they now have more road to work with, Yuani is still worried that Sasarin will catch up to them, so he asks Riche to draw a wind spell to give them an extra boost in speed. But unfortunately, Riche doesn't actually know any good wind spells since she never bothered to learn them. She is finally starting to understand why Chifri kept trying to force her to learn, and she feels pretty useless right now, but to her surprise, instead of overlooking her for her lack of knowledge, Yuani tells her she can use his book of pre-prepared spells if she wants. He made them so he wouldn't have to draw during the exam, but it looks like Riche could use it a lot more than him right now, so he wants to help her. And Riche is really touched by the gesture, since it's one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for her. Meanwhile, Agat is still trying to figure out why Sasarin is chasing after them in the first place, since it's not common for an apprentice to run into this kind of trouble with the brimmed caps. She then recalls what happened with the trap they got sucked into last time, and the fact that they were apparently after Coco back then. So Agat assumes Sasarin must be here looking for Coco as well, and she comes up with an idea to get him to stop chasing them. She stops pushing the sled and tells Sasarin that Coco isn't here. She then lies, trying to convince him that Coco was captured by the Knights Morales and had her memory erased weeks ago, and Agat is pretty convincing, so Sasarin might have fallen for it. But unfortunately for her, he literally saw Coco right outside the test site before he came in, so he knows Agat is lying. He pins Agat to the ground, and when the others try to come save her, he blocks their path with an ice wall. Sasarin begins a whole speech about how the pointed caps of the past were hypocritical sinners, and they have made the witches of today cowards who fear their own power even though it could grant them everything they want. For example, it could grant Agat the ability to grow up immediately, since she so desperately wants to be recognized as an adult, Riche could create a world where she never needs to grow up, and Yuini could make it so he doesn't need to hide his spells, but they are all too scared to do so. Cicerin personally has no grudge against Agat or the others, but to fulfill his dream of bringing forbidden magic back to the light, sacrifices need to be made, and he's sure that after Coco's dear friend comes to harm, if he were to present her with forbidden magic to save Agat, there's no way she would refuse. Cicerin then rolls up Agat's sleeve and begins cutting into her arm, and as soon as he does this, Agat realizes just how much danger she is in because Cicerin intends to tattoo a spell onto her arm. She starts squirming and fighting to get free, but she's not strong enough to escape Cicerin's grasp. However, just as she is about to give up hope, she sees Riche running up with a ribbon, and she tells Agat to grab onto it before she falls. Agat has no idea what Riche is talking about, but a moment later, the ground collapses beneath Cicerin's non-existent feet, and he ends up letting go of Agat, so Riche pulls her back up to the path. Agat is relieved that she managed to escape, but she has no idea what caused that explosion just now, so she asks Rich, and Rich explains to her that Yuini was the one behind it. He had snuck under the path while the brimmed cap was trying to tattoo Agat, and since stepping off the path causes you to get lost in the labyrinth, they figured that destroying the path underneath Cicerin would get rid of him. However, Agat points out that Cicerin has been flying this entire time, and he doesn't even have feet to begin with, so a fall like that won't be enough to get rid of him. Meanwhile, under the path, Yuini is preparing to make his way back up, and he is thinking to himself about how useful his cloak spell ended up becoming, and he is sure that with this, he can prove to his master that he isn't useless after all. But Yuini's future is looking a little too bright for a side character, and we can't have that, so a moment later, Cicerin flies back out of the darkness and grabs Yuini. He says he normally wouldn't have been able to grab Yuini like this since he is practically invisible with that cloak on, but those ropes he's balancing on gave him away. He was originally going to go after Agat to force Coco's hand, but since that didn't work, he's just going to have to make do with him. And before Yuini can yell for help, Cicerin has completely restrained him. Up top, Agat realizes that Yuini still hasn't gotten back yet, so she and Riches start calling out for him. But to their horror, on the other side of the path, they spot Yuini emerge from the darkness, and he looks like he's in a terrible amount of pain. Cicerin had already completed the spell tattoo at this point, and Riche and Agat can do nothing but watch as Yuini's body twists and warps as a result of the transformation spell, and by the time it's over, Yuini has completely lost his sense of self and become a wolf. Riche tries to call out to him, but Yuini turns and runs away because his mind has become that of a wild animal now, and he has no idea who she is. After Yuini runs away, Cicerin then flies back up and says he's quite surprised by how things turned out since he just drew a random transformation spell on Yuini's body, and he had no idea that it would fuse him with the shade wolf coat he was wearing and turn him into a wolf. Riche is outraged that Cicerin is making jokes after what he just did to Yuini, and she demands that he turn him back, but Cicerin has no intention of doing that. Though, he tells Riche that if she really wants to do something about Yuini's state, then she's more than welcome to try, but she'll probably need to delve into forbidden magic to save him. After that, Cicerin flies away and vanishes into the cave, and once he is gone, Riche starts walking in the direction Yuini went, but Agat stops her and asks where she thinks she's going. Riche says she's obviously going to go save Yuini because she refuses to abandon a friend who is in need of her help. Agat understands that, but she says they still have a responsibility to take care of because someone needs to tell the others about what happened here. So for that reason, Agat suggests they should split up, and she asks Riche to go back out and tell Quaifree about what happened to Yuini and Alera while she goes to look for Yuini. Riche says she wants to look for Yuini instead, but Agat turns her down because Riche has only ever learned spells that she likes, so she isn't versatile enough to handle going out on her own, and Riche can't really argue with that since she saw just how important other spells are, but she feels terrible for not being able to help. Meanwhile, deep in the labyrinth, after Quaifree and the others fell down here, Coco is the first to regain consciousness, and she's having a hard time remembering what happened before they ended up here. But then it all comes back to her as she sees Quaifree severely hurt. She tries reaching out to check on Quaifree's injuries, but before she can touch him, Quaifree grabs her arm with the most deadpan expression on his face, like he just relived a past trauma. Coco apologizes for startling Quaifree, but Quaifree tells her to be quiet because he doesn't think they are alone in here. And he's right because a moment later, several gold people emerge from the darkness. These are the people who were transformed into living decorations by the ancient civilization of witches that lived here, and they hold deep resentment toward witches as a result of what happened to them. So Quaifree can only assume that they intend to attack. Coco and Techia are safe for now because, thanks to their disguised cloaks, The gold people haven't realized that they are witches, but Kyphere's cloak was destroyed, so he doesn't have the luxury of sitting still and hoping they don't notice him. His injuries are causing him a great deal of pain, but he pushes through it and gets up as he prepares to protect his students with his life.